You're not capable. They mocked the cleaner, but she surprised them by fixing the computer. Sarah Johnson wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand as she heard the laughter coming from the conference room. It was Monday morning, and the accounting firm's office buzzed with the typical start-of-the-week hustle. "Do you really think a cleaner understands anything about what we do here?" Jennifer's voice echoed through the hallway, followed by more laughter. "She probably barely knows how to read." Sarah squeezed the cleaning cloth between her hands, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest. She was 42 years old, but the lines on her face told the story of a much harder life. She lowered her head and continued wiping the office desks, pretending not to hear the cruel comments coming from the next room. That's when she heard a strange noise coming from the computers. All the screens flickered at the same time, displaying a red error message. The main system had crashed. "No, no, no!" The voice of Richard, the manager, sounded panicked. "This can't be happening now." Sarah watched discreetly through the half-open door as several employees ran back and forth, all looking at their screens with expressions of despair. Her fingers tingled, an almost irresistible urge to approach and check what was happening. But she knew her place. Or at least, that's what everyone there made sure to remind her constantly. "All the client files are inaccessible," shouted Michael, the IT coordinator, with his hands in his hair. "The presentation for Wilson Construction is in 2 hours." Manager Richard Miller was a man of average height, with thinning hair and a belly that betrayed years of business lunches. His small eyes now seemed even smaller due to the panic consuming them. He punched the desk hard, making everyone around flinch. "Can someone explain to me how this happened?" His voice came out so loud it made Sarah take a step back, even though she was in the hallway. "Sir, the system just crashed," Michael tried to explain, adjusting the thick-framed glasses that kept slipping down his sweaty nose. "I'm trying to restart it, but nothing is working." "Nothing is working," Richard repeated, his voice rising another octave. "You're paid to make sure things work. Wilson Construction represents 20% of our annual revenue." Jennifer Parker, a blonde woman of approximately 35 years, impeccably dressed in a light beige blazer, approached the manager with hurried steps. Her high heels clicked against the laminated wood floor, creating a rhythmic sound of urgency. "Richard, we need a specialized technician now," she said, crossing her arms. "Michael clearly can't fix this." "I already called the support company," replied Michael, with a defensive tone in his voice. "They said they'll send someone as soon as possible, but it might take up to an hour." "An hour?" Richard practically shouted. "We don't have an hour. The meeting is in 2 hours, and we still need to review all the data before." Sarah continued watching from the door, her bucket and cleaning cloths forgotten on the floor beside her. She knew that kind of problem. There was something about the error message she had briefly seen on the screens that was familiar to her. Very familiar. For the last 3 years, Sarah had woken up every day at 4 in the morning. While her teenage daughter still slept in the small room they shared in the Queens neighborhood of New York City, she sat in front of the old computer she had bought used. It was an old model, slow but functional enough to access the free online programming and system maintenance courses she had discovered. No one in the office knew about this. To them, she was just Sarah, the cleaning lady who tidied the rooms and emptied the trash bins. The invisible woman who arrived before everyone else and left when the workday ended. The one who never complained, never spoke much, just did her job in silence. But Sarah carried a secret that not even her daughter Emily knew completely. She wasn't studying programming just out of personal interest. She had a very specific goal, much bigger than anyone in that office could imagine. "Where's Brian?" asked Richard, looking around. "Where is that guy?" Brian Wilson, the owner's son, was a man around 30, with a well-groomed beard and a laid-back manner that contrasted with the tension in the room. He had just arrived, carrying a cup of coffee and talking on the phone. Noticing the chaos around him, he quickly hung up. "What happened?" he asked, approaching. "The system completely crashed," explained Jennifer, tossing her hair back in a dramatic gesture. "And your father will kill us if we mess up the Wilson Construction presentation." Brian looked at the screens, watching the error messages. Unlike the others, he didn't seem to panic. He had a calmness that irritated Richard, who was already nearly tearing his hair out. "What about the backup?" Brian asked, turning to Michael. I tried to access it, but it's also unavailable, Michael replied, his voice filled with frustration. It's as if everything got blocked at the same time. Sarah felt her heart race. She recognized this kind of blockage. She had seen it in her studies, had even faced something similar when her own computer got infected by a virus months ago, but she couldn't just butt in. Who would believe her? Maybe it's a virus, suggested Jennifer, though her tone made it clear she didn't really understand what she was talking about. Someone must have opened a suspicious email. It wasn't a virus, Michael said defensively. We have updated antivirus on all the machines. Well, clearly it's not working. Richard practically spat the words. That's when Sarah saw it. On the screen nearest the door, a sequence of codes flashed quickly before disappearing. She knew that sequence. She had spent weeks studying exactly that type of flaw in one of her online courses. It wasn't a common virus. It was something much more specific related to a poorly done operating system update. Her fingers itched to touch that keyboard, to check her theory. But she knew what would happen if she tried. The humiliation would be even worse than the daily comments she already endured. The support company technician arrived 40 minutes later, a thin young man with a backpack full of equipment. Everyone crowded around him as he connected cables and opened diagnostic programs. Sarah continued her cleaning but kept a discreet eye on what was happening. This is going to take a while, the technician said after 20 minutes of attempts. The system is completely frozen, and I need to do a full scan. How long? Richard's voice sounded desperate. At least 2 hours, maybe 3. 3 hours, Richard shouted. The meeting is in 1 hour now. I'm sorry, sir, but there's not much I can do to speed up the process, the technician replied, shrugging. It was when the technician left the room to get more equipment from his van that Sarah made a decision. She looked around. Most of the employees had gone out for coffee, taking advantage of the forced break. Only Jennifer remained in the room, scrolling through her phone with a bored expression. Sarah took a step toward the main computer, then another. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure everyone in the building could hear it. What do you think you're doing? Jennifer's sharp voice cut through the silence like a knife. Sarah froze, her hand inches from the keyboard. I just thought I could... Could what? Jennifer stood up, her eyes gleaming with what seemed like a mix of disbelief and cruel amusement. You think you can fix a computer? The other employees began to return, drawn by Jennifer's loud voice. Soon, a small group had formed around Sarah, who felt her face burn with shame. The cleaner thinks she's a computer technician, Jennifer announced, and laughter erupted around the room. Jennifer, please, I just wanted to help, Sarah tried to explain, her voice coming out softer than she intended. Help? A man in a blue shirt named Robert stepped forward, arms crossed and a mocking smile on his face. You probably don't even know how to turn on a computer properly. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. More laughter echoed through the room. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of them. Never in front of them. Everyone knows people like you don't have the capacity to even understand what we do here, Robert continued, his voice dripping with condescension. Stay in your place and let the professionals work. But I studied, Sarah began, but was interrupted. Studied? Jennifer let out a loud, artificial laugh. Studied what? How to mop floors? Richard appeared at the door, drawn by the commotion. His eyes narrowed when he saw Sarah near the computer. What's going on here? His voice was low but laced with threat. The cleaner was trying to mess with the computer, sir. Jennifer hurried to explain as if performing a great service. Is that true? Richard approached Sarah, who instinctively stepped back. Were you trying to tamper with the company's equipment? I just thought I might have seen something that you saw, Richard interrupted, his voice rising. You're not paid to see anything but dirt on the floor. If you touch any equipment in this company without authorization, you're fired on the spot. Understood? Sarah nodded, feeling each word like a slap in the face. And you still have the nerve to say you studied? Jennifer shook her head, feigning pity. People like you shouldn't have such high dreams. It's sad, but it's reality. Brian, who had witnessed the whole scene from the door, felt a discomfort growing in his chest. There was something in Sarah's posture, in the way she looked at the computer, that wasn't ignorance. It was recognition, like someone who knows an old enemy. "Get back to your work, Sarah," Richard ordered, making a dismissive gesture with his hand. "And be thankful I'm not firing you right now." Sarah lowered her head and picked up her bucket. Her hands trembled as she returned to the hallway, hearing the laughter and malicious comments that continued behind her. But as she scrubbed the women's bathroom floor minutes later, with tears finally streaming down her face, a determination grew inside her. She had seen the problem. She knew exactly what was causing the crash. And she knew how to fix it. The question was whether she would have the courage to try again. The clock read 10:30 in the morning. The meeting was scheduled for 11:30. The technician still hadn't returned, and when he did, he spent another 30 minutes trying different approaches, all without success. The tension in the office was palpable. Richard paced back and forth, making frantic calls, trying to postpone the meeting, but the client wasn't being receptive. "They're going to cancel the contract," Richard said, hanging up the phone harder than necessary. "Years of work thrown away because you're incompetent. Sir, I'm doing everything I can." The technician tried to defend himself, but his voice faltered. "Clearly it's not enough." Sarah was cleaning the windows of the meeting room, trying to become even more invisible than usual, but her ears caught every word, every nuance of desperation in Richard's voice. Part of her felt a bitter satisfaction. These same people who had humiliated her were now paying for their arrogance. But there was another part of her, the part that studied in the early mornings, that saw those computers as puzzles waiting to be solved. That part couldn't just leave the problem unsolved. During the lunch break, when most employees went out to eat and drown their frustrations, Sarah stayed. She always brought her own food, a simple lunchbox prepared the night before. While others went to restaurants and cafes, she ate alone in the small staff kitchen. But that day she wasn't hungry. Her stomach was too tight with anticipation of what she was about to do. She waited until she was sure she was alone. Michael had left with the others. The technician had gone to lunch. Richard was in his private office making more desperate calls. The office was silent, only the distant sound of the air conditioning humming. Sarah approached the main computer, her heart beating so hard she could feel the pulse in her throat. Her hands trembled when she touched the keyboard. The screen still showed the error message. She took a deep breath and began typing. Years of night study were now being put to the test. She needed to access the command prompt, check the system logs, identify exactly where the problem was. Her fingers flew over the keyboard with a confidence she didn't know she possessed. Line after line of code appeared on the screen, numbers and letters that to most people would seem meaningless, but to Sarah told a clear story. She was so focused that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching. "What do you think you're doing?" Richard's voice exploded behind her like thunder. Sarah jumped from the chair, almost knocking over the keyboard. Her heart was beating so fast she felt dizzy. I was trying to destroy things even more." Richard advanced toward her, his face red with anger. "I warned you what would happen if you touched the equipment." Other employees began to appear, drawn by the shouting. Jennifer was one of the first, her eyes shining with a mix of shock and morbid satisfaction. "Was she messing with the computer again?" Jennifer asked, though it was obvious she already knew the answer. "Call security," Richard ordered, pointing an accusing finger at Sarah. "I want this woman out of here immediately. Please, Mr. Richard, let me explain." Sarah tried, her voice desperate. "I know what's causing the problem. I've studied programming. I've taken courses." "Courses?" Richard let out a humorless laugh. "You expect me to believe that a cleaning lady has taken programming courses?" "It's true," Sarah insisted, trying to keep her voice steady. "In the early mornings, after my daughter sleeps, I study. I've been taking free online courses for 3 years, and I recognize the type of error happening in the computers. It's not a common virus, it's a flaw related to the latest operating system update." The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone looked at her with expressions ranging from disbelief to contempt. Then the laughter began, low at first, then growing until it filled the room. "She thinks she's a programmer," someone shouted from the back of the room. "Maybe she learned on YouTube." another suggested, provoking more laughter. People like you will never understand technology, Jennifer said, shaking her head with a condescension that hurt more than any physical slap. It's beautiful that you have dreams, but you need to be realistic. You're a cleaner. That's all you are, all you'll ever be. Sarah felt something break inside her. It wasn't the first time she'd heard cruel words, but there was something particularly cutting about this moment. Maybe it was because she had tried, really tried to do something beyond what was expected of her, and was being crushed for it. "Security!" Richard yelled. "Where is security?" That's when Brian appeared at the door. He had stepped out to get coffee from a nearby cafe and was returning when he heard the commotion. He observed the scene for a moment. Sarah at the center, surrounded by staff looking at her with disdain, Richard red with anger, his finger still pointed accusingly. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice cutting through the laughter. "The cleaner was messing with the computer without authorization," Richard explained, his voice still filled with indignation. "I'm arranging her immediate dismissal." Brian looked at Sarah. Her eyes were red, clearly fighting back tears. But there was something else there, something that caught his attention, determination and knowledge. He had seen that look before in experienced programmers tackling complex problems. "Wait," said Brian, raising a hand. "Let me understand. She said she studied programming." "She said a lot of things," Richard replied dismissively. "We all know it's impossible. A cleaner studying programming? Please." "Why is it impossible?" Brian questioned, and something in his voice made Richard hesitate. "Well, it's obvious, isn't it?" Richard gestured vaguely. "She has no education, no access." "Online courses are free," Brian interrupted. "Anyone with internet can access them. And as for education, many of the best programmers I know are self-taught." Jennifer rolled her eyes. "Brian, with all due respect, you can't be taking this seriously. She's a cleaner. And what does that have to do with her ability to learn?" Brian turned to Sarah, who was looking at him with a mix of hope and disbelief. "You said you recognized the type of error?" Sarah nodded slowly, still not believing that someone was actually listening to her. "It's a flaw in the operating system update. It happens when there's a conflict between an old version of a specific driver and the new update. The system tries to compensate, but ends up crashing everything." The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't mockery, but surprise. Even Michael, the IT coordinator, seemed impressed by the technical precision of the description. "And do you know how to fix it?" Brian asked. "I believe so," Sarah replied, her voice gaining a bit more strength. "It would be necessary to access safe mode, revert the specific driver, and then do a custom manual update." "That's," Michael began, then stopped, adjusting his glasses. "That's exactly what the technical manuals suggest for this type of situation." "She memorized some technical words from the internet," Jennifer said quickly, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "That doesn't mean she actually understands." "Then let's test it," Brian suggested. He looked at Richard. "Do we have anything to lose?" "The technician couldn't fix it. We have less than an hour until the meeting, and from what I understand, we'll lose this client if we don't present something." Richard hesitated. His mouth opened and closed a few times like a fish out of water. On one hand, the idea of letting a cleaner mess with the company's systems was absurd. On the other hand, he was desperate. "5 minutes," Brian said, before Richard could respond. "Give her 5 minutes. If it doesn't work, nothing's changed." "But if it worked—" "This is ridiculous," Jennifer protested. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," Brian replied, and there was a firmness in his voice that made everyone realize he wasn't just making a casual suggestion. "Sarah, will you give it a try?" Sarah looked around the room. She saw expressions of doubt, disbelief, and a morbid hope to see her fail. But she also saw the opportunity, the chance to prove, not to them, but to herself, that all those years of study, all those sacrificed early mornings, had meant something. "I accept," she said, and was surprised by the firmness in her own voice. Richard let out a long, exasperated sigh. 5 minutes, not a second more. And if you make things worse, I'll sue you for damages." Sarah sat in the chair, aware of all the eyes fixed on her. Her hands were still trembling, but she began to type. First, she needed to access safe mode without completely restarting the system, as that could take too long. There was a shortcut, a specific command that allowed it. Her fingers flew over the keyboard. Line after line of command appeared on the black screen. To most people around, it just looked like a bunch of meaningless letters and numbers, but Sarah knew exactly what she was doing. "She's just typing randomly," Robert whispered to Jennifer, but his voice was less confident than before. "Of course she is," Jennifer agreed, but her eyes were fixed on the screen, trying to understand what was happening. Sarah ignored the comments. She located the problematic driver, exactly where she expected to find it. It was a network driver, installed 3 weeks ago during the last automatic system update. It was conflicting with the company's security software, creating a loop that eventually crashed the entire system. "Found it," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. "Found what?" Michael leaned in, bending over to see the screen better. His eyes widened when he saw the code. "Is it the network driver?" "Yes," Sarah confirmed, her fingers already working to reverse the installation. "It's creating a conflict with the firewall. The system keeps trying to resolve the conflict, but ends up crashing because the two programs are fighting for control of the same function." I hadn't even thought to check that," Michael admitted, and there was something like respect growing in his voice. The clock on the wall read 11:15. 15 minutes until the meeting. Sarah worked quickly but with precision. Each command was typed with certainty, the result of hundreds of hours studying exactly this kind of problem. Suddenly one of the screens flickered, then another, and another. The error messages began to disappear, replaced by the normal system loading screen. "It's working," Michael said, his voice filled with disbelief. "She's actually making it work." Jennifer turned pale. Robert stopped smiling. Richard approached the screen, his eyes narrowed, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. One by one, the computers began to come back to life. The screens showed the normal desktops, programs starting to load. The system was recovering, but then a new error message appeared. Different from the previous one, this one was more serious. A critical error that threatened to corrupt data if not addressed immediately. "No!" Richard's shout echoed through the room. "You made it worse." "No," Sarah said calmly, though her heart was racing. This error was hidden by the first problem. That's why no one had seen it before. But now that we've unlocked the system, it's become visible. "And can you fix it?" Brian asked, his voice tense. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Her eyes ran over the lines of code on the screen, analyzing, processing. This kind of error was more complicated. She had studied something similar but had never faced it in practice. "I can try," she finally said. "No." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! You've already caused enough damage. Get away from that computer now." "Richard," Brian intervened, his voice firm. "Let her finish. We're out of options here." "Out of options? The technician can fix this." "The technician couldn't even identify the first problem," Brian pointed out. "And if this error was hidden, he wouldn't have seen it either. At least she knows what she's doing." Richard hesitated, his jaw tight. Finally, he gestured abruptly for Sarah to continue. Sarah took a deep breath. Her hands stopped shaking. It was as if something inside her had clicked. All those years of study, all those sleepless nights, everything had been for this moment. She began working on the new error, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with growing confidence. The code appeared on the screen, each line a solution to a specific problem. It was complex, requiring not only technical knowledge but intuition, the ability to see patterns where others saw only chaos. "What is she doing now?" Jennifer asked Michael, her voice low. "She's..." Michael paused, watching more closely. "She's creating a custom patch. She's literally writing code to bypass the error without losing data. I didn't even know it was possible to do this manually like that." "So she really knows her stuff?" Jennifer's voice had lost all condescension, replaced by something close to shock. "She more than knows," Michael replied, and there was admiration in his voice. "She's good. Very good." The clock read 11:25. 5 minutes until the meeting. Sarah typed the last line of code and pressed enter. For a moment, nothing happened. The screen froze and everyone's heart in the room seemed to stop with it. Then, slowly, the system responded. The error message disappeared. The programs began loading normally. File by file, folder by folder, everything came back. "It worked," Michael murmured, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "She did it." Richard approached the computer, his fingers trembling as he clicked through the files. Everything was there. All the client data, completely accessible. He opened the Wilson Construction presentation file. It was intact, every slide, every chart, every number exactly as it should be. "The data is all here," he said, his voice low and disbelieving. "Everything is here." Sarah stood up from the chair, her legs wobbly. She had done it, really done it. Her hands still trembled, but now it was from relief, not nervousness. "I said I could help," she said softly. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone looked at her with expressions ranging from shock, disbelief, and something that seemed like reluctant respect. Jennifer was particularly pale, her eyes wide as if she had seen something impossible. "How," Richard began, then stopped, not knowing how to continue. "How did you learn this?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Sarah took a deep breath before answering. For the first time since she started working in that office, she felt that maybe, just maybe, someone was really willing to listen to her. "I wake up every day at 4 in the morning, she began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "My daughter Emily is 15 and sleeps in the room we share. While she's still sleeping, I sit in front of my old computer and access free online courses. I studied basic programming, then moved on to operating systems, networks, security. I've been doing this for 3 years. "Why?" Brian asked, genuinely curious. "Why do this?" Sarah hesitated. There was a simple answer she could give, but looking at all those faces, she decided on the truth, the whole truth. "Because I want to give my daughter a better life," she said, and her voice trembled slightly. "I want her not to have to clean offices for the rest of her life. I want her to be able to go to a university, have opportunities I never had. And for that, I need a better job, one that pays better. But without a formal education, without a diploma, the only chance I have is to become good enough that no one can ignore my knowledge." The words fell over the room like stones in a lake, creating waves of discomfort. For the first time, many there were seeing Sarah not as the invisible cleaner, but as a real person with dreams, with struggles, with a story that went far beyond the bucket and the cleaning cloth. I didn't know," Jennifer said, and there was something like shame in her voice. Not much, but a trace of it. "No one asked," Sarah replied, without bitterness, just stating a fact. The meeting with Wilson Construction happened. Richard managed to present all the necessary data, and the contract was maintained. But throughout the presentation, his mind was elsewhere, processing what had happened that morning. When the meeting ended and the clients left satisfied, Richard returned to the main office. Sarah was there, back at her cleaning work, as if nothing had happened. She was wiping the tables with the same diligence as always, her head down, quiet. "Sarah," Richard called her, and she stopped, turning slowly. "Yes, sir." Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. There were so many things he could say, so many things he should say. A thank you, an apology, an acknowledgement. But the words didn't come easily. "Good work today," he managed to say finally. You saved the company." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, and there was something sad in her smile. She knew that was all she would get. A quick thank you, then everything would go back to normal. She would still be the cleaner, invisible, insignificant, but she was mistaken. Because while Richard was returning to his office, wrestling with his own pride and prejudices, Brian was having a very different conversation with Michael. "She's really good, isn't she?" Brian said, more a statement than a question. "Very good," Michael agreed. "Honestly, I wouldn't have thought of that solution. And the way she created that custom patch, That requires a level of understanding that goes beyond just following tutorials. What do you think about training her? Brian suggested. Michael blinked, surprised. Train Sarah? For what? To be an IT technician. Obviously she has the knowledge. She just needs a chance to apply it for real. Brian, Michael hesitated. I don't know if your father would approve of that. She doesn't have a diploma, no formal certifications. She just solved a problem that you and a professional technician couldn't, Brian pointed out. Isn't that worth more than any paper? Michael had no answer for that, because deep down he knew Brian was right. But things aren't as simple as they should be. Recognizing someone's talent is one thing. Giving that person a real opportunity is something completely different. And in the office of that accounting firm in New York City, the gears of prejudice and social hierarchy were deeply rooted. In the following days, a strange tension hung over the office. Sarah returned to her cleaning routine, but now there was something different. People looked at her strangely, as if they were seeing something they didn't know how to process. Some avoided her gaze, others watched her with an uncomfortable curiosity. Jennifer in particular seemed disturbed. She, who had always treated Sarah Johnson with casual condescension, now didn't know how to act. Several times Sarah caught her looking, only for Jennifer to quickly avert her eyes, a flush of shame coloring her cheeks. But it wasn't until a week later that things really started to change, and not in the way Sarah had expected. It was a Thursday afternoon when Richard called her into his office. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Calls to the manager's office were rarely good news for people in her position. "Have a seat," Richard said, pointing to the chair in front of his desk. Sarah sat, hands clenched in her lap, bracing for the worst. "Sarah, Richard paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I want you to know that we appreciate what you did last week. You saved the company from a very difficult situation." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, still tense. "That said, I need to make something clear," Richard continued, his voice taking on a firmer tone. "What you did was extraordinary, but it was also inappropriate. You tampered with company equipment without authorization. Regardless of the results, that cannot happen again." The words hurt more than Sarah had expected. Not that she didn't understand the logic, but there was something deeply unfair about it. She had saved the company, yet she was still being reprimanded. "I understand, sir," she said quietly. "Good. Now, about another matter." Richard leaned back in his chair. "Brian suggested we consider training you for a position in IT, but after speaking with my brother, the company owner, we reached a different conclusion." Sarah felt a chill in her stomach. She knew what was coming. "While we recognize your technical knowledge, it's simply not feasible to have someone without formal credentials in an IT position. Our clients expect a certain level of professionalism, and hiring a cleaner, even a talented one, would send the wrong message." "The wrong message?" Sarah repeated, her voice devoid of emotion. "So you understand how it is, don't you?" Richard continued, and there was something like an apology in his voice, though superficial. "It's a matter of appearances, but we will increase your salary, as a way of thanking you for what you did." "How much?" Sarah asked, though she already knew any amount would be insignificant compared to what she truly deserved. "An extra $100 a month," Richard announced, as if offering a fortune. Sarah was silent for a long moment. $100. She had saved a contract worth millions for the company, and her recognition was an extra $100 a month and a reprimand for tampering with the computers. "That's fair, don't you think?" Richard asked, and there was an expectation in his voice as if he anticipated gratitude. "Yes, sir," Sarah said, because what other answer could she give? "Very fair." "Great. Then it's settled. Keep up the excellent cleaning work, and if you see any problems with the computers again, please let us know instead of trying to fix them yourself." Sarah nodded and stood up. Her legs were shaky as she walked back to the hallway. $100. She had managed to prove her worth, had demonstrated knowledge that rivaled that of trained professionals, and all she got was $100 and the order to never dare step out of her place again. She locked herself in the bathroom and finally allowed the tears to fall. Not tears of sadness, but of anger. Anger at herself for believing, even for a brief moment, that something could change. Anger at a system that valued roles more than ability. Anger at people who had the power to change lives but chose to do nothing. But as she dried her tears and looked at her reflection in the mirror, Sarah Johnson made a decision. She wasn't going to give up. If that place didn't recognize her worth, then she would find one that did. Somehow, some way, she would prove to the world, and more importantly to her daughter, that it was possible to overcome the barriers society placed. What Sarah didn't know was that she wasn't as alone as she thought. Brian hadn't accepted his uncle and father's decision as easily as Richard expected, and while Sarah cried in the bathroom, he was having a heated conversation in the company owner's office. "Dad, this isn't right," Brian said, his voice firm but respectful. "Sarah has more practical knowledge than half our IT department. Denying her an opportunity just because of prejudice is wrong." William Wilson, a 63-year-old man with graying hair and a permanently stern expression, looked at his son with a mixture of frustration and something resembling pride in the young man's conviction. "Brian, you're young and have progressive ideas, and I respect that," said William, his voice heavy with decades of business experience. "But you don't understand market realities. Our clients expect professionals with credentials. If they found out a former cleaner was handling their systems, why would they need to know?" Brian interrupted. "And even if they did, what matters is that she's competent. She's proven that." "She's proven she can solve a specific problem," William corrected. "That doesn't mean she's ready for a permanent position in IT." "Then test her. Give her a probation period. If it doesn't work out, you can say you tried, but at least give her a chance." William sighed, rubbing his temples with his fingers, a gesture he made when tired or under pressure. "Brian, why are you defending this woman so much? You barely know her." "Because it's the right thing to do," Brian replied simply. "And because if we don't give people chances, we'll never know what they're capable of." Father and son stared at each other for a long moment. There was history there, years of expectations and disappointments, different philosophies on how to run a business, on how to treat employees. "Let me think about it," William finally said. "How long?" Brian pressed. "A week. I'll think for a week." It was more than Brian had expected to get from that conversation, so he nodded and left the office. But as he walked through the halls, he passed Sarah, who was returning from the bathroom, her eyes still red. "Sarah," he called, making her stop. "Are you okay?" "Yes, sir," she replied automatically, avoiding eye contact. "I spoke with my father about a position in IT for you," Brian said, ignoring the obvious lie in her response. "He's going to think about it." Sarah looked at him, surprised. "Mr. Richard said it wasn't possible." "My uncle doesn't always make the final decisions," Brian replied with a small smile. "My father is the owner, and he's considering it." "Why?" Sarah asked, genuinely confused. "Why are you doing this for me?" Brian was silent for a moment, considering the question. "Because I saw the way you looked at those computers," he finally said. It wasn't the look of someone who wanted to impress others. It was the look of someone who truly loves what they do. And talent like that shouldn't be wasted cleaning offices, no matter how honorable that work is. Sarah felt tears threatening to return, but this time they were different. They were tears of hope, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Don't thank me yet," Brian warned. "My father is stubborn, and my uncle is against it. But I'll keep trying." That night, when Sarah arrived home, Emily was waiting up for her. The girl was 15, with curly hair she'd inherited from her absent father, and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked as soon as Sarah entered the small two-bedroom apartment they called home. "I am, sweetie," Sarah replied, taking off her worn-out shoes. "Just a long day." "You always say that," Emily pointed out, closing the notebook where she'd been doing homework. "But you seem different today. Did something happen at work?" Sarah hesitated. She always tried to protect Emily from the difficulties they faced, but the girl was too sharp to be fooled for long. "Something did happen," Sarah finally admitted, sitting on the old, patched-up sofa. I managed to help the company with a technical problem, a computer issue nobody else could solve. Emily's eyes lit up. Really? You used everything you studied? I did, and it worked. Mom, that's amazing! Emily jumped from where she was sitting and hugged Sarah tightly. They're going to promote you, right? You'll work with computers now. Sarah hugged her daughter back, feeling her heart tighten. I don't know, sweetie. It's complicated. Why is it complicated? You're good at what you do. You studied so hard. Because the world doesn't always work the way it should, Sarah replied, choosing her words carefully. But there might be a chance. The owner's son is trying to help me. Emily pulled back, looking at her mother with that seriousness that sometimes made Sarah forget she was still a teenager. You always tell me that if I work hard and study, I can achieve anything, Emily said. You have to believe that too, Mom. I know, sweetie, and I do. It's just harder than it seems sometimes. But you're not going to give up, right? There was an urgency in Emily's voice that made Sarah look at her more closely. Never, Sarah promised. I'll never give up. Good, Emily said, returning to her spot on the floor where her notebooks were scattered. Because I won't either. I'm going to get the best grades, earn a scholarship to a good school, and then we'll both show everyone that it doesn't matter where we come from. Sarah smiled, feeling pride swell in her chest. Emily was the reason for everything. Every early morning, every humiliation swallowed at work, every dollar saved. It was all for her. The following week, the tension in the office was palpable. Sarah could feel eyes following her, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. The rumor that she might be promoted had spread faster than wildfire. This is ridiculous, Jennifer commented during the lunch break, her voice loud enough for several people to hear. How long has she worked here? 3 years, 4? And suddenly she's a computer expert? She solved a problem nobody else could, Robert pointed out, though his voice was hesitant. So what? Jennifer shot back. A broken clock is right twice a day. That doesn't mean we should give her a position that people with degrees and years of experience have worked hard to get. Maybe that's exactly what we need. A new voice joined the conversation. It was Margaret Thompson, one of the company's senior analysts, a woman in her 50s who had always been quiet but efficient. Maybe we need to question why we value paperwork more than actual results. Margaret, you can't be serious. Jennifer turned to her, incredulous. I'm completely serious, Margaret replied calmly. I've worked here for 23 years. I've seen people with impressive degrees come in and not manage to do half of what they should. And I've seen people without formal education work harder and better than anyone. Credentials are important, but they aren't everything. But she's a cleaner, Jennifer insisted, as if that explained everything. She was a cleaner, Emily corrected. Now maybe she's something else, and honestly, after seeing how we've treated her all these years, maybe we're the ones who need a lesson in humility, not her. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Because Emily had touched on something many preferred not to think about. Sarah had been invisible to all of them for years. How many times had she greeted someone and been ignored? How many times did she have to wait because someone important was using the elevator? How many small daily humiliations had she swallowed in silence? Sarah, who was cleaning a nearby room, overheard part of the conversation. Emily's words warmed her inside, but also made her sad, because it was true. She had been invisible, and part of her still hoped to remain that way. But the part of her that woke up at 4 in the morning, that studied while others slept, that dreamed of something bigger, that part refused to accept invisibility as a permanent fate. The week passed slowly. Each day seemed to last an eternity. Sarah continued her cleaning work with the same diligence as always, but her mind was elsewhere, imagining possibilities, fearing disappointments. It was on a Friday afternoon that William Wilson finally called Sarah into his office. She went up to the executive floor on trembling legs, each step feeling like it weighed a ton. William's office was large and intimidating, with dark wood furniture and shelves full of books and trophies. He was sitting behind his desk, Brian standing by his side. "Have a seat, please," William said, his voice formal but not unfriendly. Sarah sat down, her hands clasped in her lap. "Sarah, "My son spoke to me about you," William began. "And I've spent the last week thinking a lot about the situation." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice to respond. "He convinced me it would be a waste not to give you a chance," William continued. "But I need to make it clear, this isn't an automatic promotion. It's a 3-month trial period. You'll work with Michael in the IT department, learning the company's systems, helping with technical issues. During this period, you'll receive an IT assistant's salary, which is significantly higher than your current pay." Sarah felt her heart race. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. "If after 3 months you prove you can do the job," William said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "then we'll discuss a permanent position. But if you can't meet expectations, you'll return to your previous position. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Sarah managed to say, her voice trembling. "Very clear." "There's one more thing." William leaned back in his chair. "You'll continue doing some cleaning tasks during these 3 months. Not because I want to belittle you, but because I need to be sure you can handle both responsibilities. If you show you're capable, then this requirement will be removed." It was a test. Sarah knew it. William was giving her a chance, but a chance with conditions, with challenges. Part of her wanted to protest, to question why she had to prove herself more than anyone else. But the pragmatic part knew this was more than she had hoped to get. "I understand, sir," she said, "and I appreciate the opportunity." "Don't thank me yet," William said with a small smile. "Thank me when you succeed." Sarah left the office in a state of shock. Her feet automatically carried her back to the main floor, but her mind was racing. An opportunity, a real chance. 3 months to prove her worth. She thought of Emily, how the girl's eyes would shine when she heard the news. She thought of all those early mornings of studying that would finally have a concrete purpose. She thought of the future that for the first time in a long while seemed a little brighter, but she also thought of the challenges that would come. Because she wasn't naive, she knew that many people in the office wouldn't be happy about this. She knew she would be watched closely, judged more harshly than anyone else in a similar position. And she was right. When the news spread through the office, the reactions were mixed. Emily and a few others congratulated Sarah sincerely, but many, including Jennifer and Robert, barely hid their disapproval. "It's only because she told a sob story to Brian," Sarah overheard Jennifer comment as she passed by in the hallway. 3 months, and she'll be back cleaning bathrooms. The words hurt, but Sarah swallowed them. She was used to it. What she wasn't used to was the feeling of hope she now carried. It was scary and exciting at the same time. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That night, when she told Emily, the girl burst into tears of happiness and hugged Sarah so tightly she almost knocked her over. "I knew it," Emily said between sobs. "I knew you could do it." "I haven't done anything yet," Sarah cautioned, though she couldn't stop a smile. "I have 3 months to prove I deserve it." "You will prove it," Emily said with absolute conviction. "You're the smartest and hardest working person I know." That night Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, processing everything that had happened. Part of her was terrified. What if she failed? What if all that studying wasn't enough? What if Jennifer was right and she went back to cleaning in 3 months? But there was another part, a stronger part, that was determined. She had come this far against all odds. She wouldn't let fear or doubt stop her now. The following Monday was Sarah's first day in her new role. She arrived an hour earlier than usual, nervous and anxious. She wore a blouse and pants she had bought specifically for the occasion, clothes more formal than she was used to. Michael met her at the reception and took her to the IT department. It was a smaller room than Sarah had imagined, with several desks equipped with multiple monitors, tangled cables and equipment that looked complex. "Well, this will be your workspace," Michael said, pointing to a desk in the corner. "I'll give you basic tasks at first to assess your knowledge level. Then we'll advance as you demonstrate capability." "Understood," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. The first few days were difficult, but not in the way Sarah had expected. Technically, she could handle the tasks Michael gave her. In fact, She often found faster and more efficient solutions than he expected. The hard part was the social aspect. Jennifer made a point of walking through the IT department several times a day, always with a sarcastic comment. "How's the former cleaner?" she would ask, a fake smile on her lips. "Learned where the on-off button is yet?" Robert was more subtle but no less cruel. He often asked Sarah to fetch coffee or clean up a spill, always in front of other employees, always with a tone that made it clear he still saw her only as a cleaner. "Sarah, there's a coffee spill in the meeting room," he would say. "Since you're still doing cleaning, can you take care of it?" And technically, he was right. As part of the agreement with William, Sarah still had to do some cleaning tasks. She cleaned the restrooms before everyone arrived, emptied trash bins at the end of the day. It was humiliating, especially when other IT employees didn't have to do any of that. But she swallowed her pride and did it. Michael, to his credit, was professional. He treated Sarah as he would any new IT employee, with patience and respect. But Sarah could see the doubt in his eyes sometimes, the unspoken question. Did she really belong here? 2 weeks passed. Sarah was starting to feel more comfortable with the daily tasks. She had resolved several minor technical issues, set up new computers, installed software. Nothing dramatic like saving the entire system again, but solid and competent work. It was on a Wednesday afternoon that things started to get complicated. Michael was out in a meeting with a vendor. Richard appeared in the IT department, his face red, clearly agitated. "Where's Michael?" he asked abruptly. "He's in a meeting, sir," Sarah replied. "He'll be back in an hour." "An hour?" Richard exploded. "I don't have an hour. The accounting system is giving an error, and I need the financial reports now." Sarah stood up. "I can take a look, sir." Richard looked at her with suspicion. "Do you know how to work with the accounting system?" "I haven't worked on it specifically, but I can identify the type of error and maybe fix it, or at least minimize it until Michael gets back." Richard hesitated, but his need was greater than his prejudice at that moment. "Fine. But if you make it worse, I won't make it worse, sir," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. She followed Richard to his office where the accounting system was open, showing a series of error messages. Sarah leaned in to see better, her eyes scanning the messages. It was a database problem. The connection was being repeatedly interrupted, probably due to a recent update that had changed the security settings. It wasn't much different from issues she had studied. "I can try a solution," she said, "but I'll need access to the server settings." "Do whatever's necessary," Richard said, and there was desperation in his voice. Sarah got to work. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing systems, checking settings, making small adjustments. Richard watched over her shoulder, alternating between hope and skepticism. It took 20 minutes, but Sarah managed to re-establish the database connection. The system started working normally again, and Richard was able to generate the reports he needed. You did it," he said, and there was genuine surprise in his voice. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, allowing herself a small smile. "How did you learn to do that?" "I studied database architecture in one of the online courses," Sarah explained. "Connection problems are common and usually have straightforward solutions if you know where to look." Richard looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see something changing in his eyes. It wasn't full respect, not yet, but it was recognition. He was starting to see that perhaps, just perhaps, she really knew what she was doing. "Good work," he finally said, and although the words were simple, they meant a lot. The news that Sarah had solved another major problem spread quickly through the office. Some were impressed. Others, like Jennifer, only increased their hostility. "She's just lucky," Jennifer said to a group of colleagues during lunch. "She's always in the right place at the right time, but luck doesn't last forever." Sarah heard the comment as she passed by the break room. The words bothered her more than she cared to admit, because part of her wondered if Jennifer wasn't right. Was she really competent or just lucky? But then she thought about all the hours of study, all the courses completed, all the practical problems she had solved on her personal computer just to learn. It wasn't luck. It was preparation meeting opportunity. Still, doubt followed her like a shadow, and the tension in the office kept growing. because Sarah's presence in a different role forced everyone to confront their own assumptions about class, education, and merit. A month had passed since Sarah started her probation period. She was now handling more complex tasks, and Michael was beginning to trust her with larger projects. But the requirement to continue with cleaning duties remained, a daily humiliation that Sarah endured in silence. It was during the second week of the second month that something significant happened. The company was implementing a new security system across the entire network. It was a big project, and Michael was overwhelmed trying to coordinate everything. "Sarah," he called her one particularly chaotic morning, "I need you to set up the new firewalls on all the machines on the third floor. Here's the instruction manual." Sarah took the manual, a thick document full of technical jargon. She flipped through it quickly, absorbing the main information. "Understood," she said. "How much time do I have?" "Ideally by the end of the day, but if you need more time, we can extend it to tomorrow." Sarah went up to the third floor with her laptop and the necessary tools. It was the floor where most executives and managers worked, including Jennifer and Robert. She could feel the stairs as she moved from room to room, setting up the firewalls. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" Robert asked when she entered his room. "I don't want you to mess up my computer." "I won't mess anything up, sir," Sarah replied politely, although her hands itched to do something more creative to his computer. She worked methodically, room by room, computer by computer. The process was tedious but not particularly difficult, until she reached Jennifer's computer. Something was wrong. When Sarah started configuring the firewall, she noticed unusual activity in the system. There were programs running in the background that shouldn't be there, network connections that seemed suspicious. She hesitated. Should she investigate or just do her job and move on? But her curiosity and programmer's instinct were too strong. She opened the task manager and began to investigate further. What she found shocked her. There was monitoring software installed, a keylogger that recorded every keystroke. And more disturbingly, there was evidence of file transfers to an external server. Sarah felt her heart race. This was serious, very serious. Someone was stealing company data. "Found any problems?" Jennifer's voice behind her made Sarah jump. Sarah turned, not quite sure what to say. "I was just setting up the firewall." "You're taking longer here than on the other computers," Jennifer observed, her eyes narrowing. "Why?" "Your computer has a few extra programs running," Sarah said carefully. "I was checking to make sure the firewall wouldn't conflict with anything." "Oh," Jennifer seemed to relax a bit. "Well, finish up quickly. I have work to do." Sarah finished the basic firewall configuration, but her mind was racing. She needed to report what she had found. But to whom? And how would Jennifer react if she found out it was Sarah who exposed her? She finished the configurations on the third floor and went down to find Michael. He was in his office, surrounded by manuals and making notes. "Michael," Sarah said, her voice low and urgent. "I need to talk to you about something I found. Any problems with the settings?" he asked without looking up from his notes. "Not exactly. I found something on Jennifer's computer, monitoring software, and evidence of data transfers to an external server." This made Michael stop and look at her. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I took screenshots before I logged off. Here." Sarah showed the evidence on her laptop. Michael examined the images, his face growing progressively more serious. This is very serious," he finally said. "We need to take this to William immediately." "But," Sarah hesitated, "what if it's a misunderstanding? What if there's an explanation?" "There's no innocent explanation for an unauthorized keylogger on a company computer," Michael said firmly. "Let's go, now." They went up to William's office. Brian was also there, discussing some projects with his father. Both looked surprised when Michael and Sarah entered without an appointment. "What happened?" William asked, immediately recognizing the seriousness in Michael's expression. "Sarah found something concerning while setting up the new firewalls," Michael explained. "Show them, Sarah." Sarah, nervous, showed the screenshots and explained what she had found. William and Brian listened in silence, their expressions growing increasingly grave. "This was on Jennifer Parker's computer," William asked when she finished. Yes, sir. And are you sure it wasn't part of some legitimate software? I'm sure, sir. I recognize the type of software. It's used for spying. And the data transfers were to a server that doesn't belong to the company. William rubbed his face with his hands, a gesture of someone processing very unpleasant information. This explains some things, he murmured. We've had some information leaks in recent months. Our proposals mysteriously ended up in competitors' hands before being presented to clients. Do you think Jennifer was selling information? Brian asked, incredulous. I don't know what to think, William admitted, but we're going to find out. Michael, I need you to do a full analysis of her computer. I want to know exactly what was accessed and where it was sent, and do it discreetly. I don't want her to know we're investigating until we have all the evidence. Understood, sir, Michael said. Sarah, William turned to her. Good job identifying this. But I need you to keep this absolutely confidential. Don't say anything to anyone, understood? Yes, sir, Sarah replied. As she left the office, Sarah felt a mix of emotions. Pride for having identified something important, fear of what might happen when the truth came out, and a growing concern about how Jennifer and others would react when they found out she was the one who uncovered everything. The following days were tense. Michael worked discreetly, analyzing Jennifer's computer when she wasn't around. Sarah continued her normal tasks, but it was hard to act naturally when she knew what was happening behind the scenes. Jennifer, unaware she was being investigated, continued her casual hostility towards Sarah. Still playing technician, she commented whenever she passed Sarah. Enjoy it while it lasts. I'm sure you'll be back in your proper place soon. The words had an irony now that Sarah knew the truth, but she kept her face neutral, revealing nothing. It was on a Friday, 3 days after the initial discovery, that everything blew up. William called an urgent meeting with all managers and coordinators. Jennifer was there, confident and elegant as always. She had no idea what was about to happen. Thank you all for coming, William began, his voice steady. We recently discovered that there was a leak of confidential company information that resulted in significant financial losses. A murmur of shock swept through the room. Jennifer remained calm, but Sarah, watching from the doorway where she stood, she had been called to be present, though she didn't know exactly why, noticed a slight tension in her shoulders. After an investigation, William continued, we identified the source of the leak. Jennifer Parker, you are being terminated for just cause, effective immediately. The company is also considering legal action for theft of intellectual property and breach of confidentiality. The silence that followed was absolute. All heads turned to Jennifer, who had turned white as a sheet. What? She managed to say, her voice hoarse. This is absurd. I didn't do anything. We have extensive evidence, William said coldly. Unauthorized monitoring software on your computer, transfers of confidential files to external servers, including correspondence with representatives of competing companies. Who discovered this? Jennifer asked, and her eyes scanned the room until they landed on Sarah. Something in her face must have given it away, because Jennifer's eyes narrowed. It was you, wasn't it? The cleaning lady. You planted that evidence. Sarah didn't plant anything. Michael spoke up. She was setting up firewalls and identified suspicious activity. I conducted the full investigation and verified all the evidence. Everything is real and traceable back to you. Jennifer looked around the room, seeking support, but found only looks of shock and disapproval. The reality of the situation began to sink in. I needed the money, she said finally, her voice breaking. You don't understand. I have debts, expenses. The salary wasn't enough. Then you should have asked for a raise or looked for another job, William said unsympathetically. Not betray the trust of everyone in this company. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. You have 15 minutes. Jennifer left the room escorted, her high heels clicking for the last time on the floor she had walked with so much arrogance. As she passed Sarah, she stopped and whispered low enough for only Sarah to hear, You may have taken me down, but don't think that changes who you are. You're still just a cleaning lady who got lucky. The words were meant to hurt, and they did. But Sarah kept her head high and didn't respond. because responding would give Jennifer a satisfaction she didn't deserve. After Jennifer left, the meeting continued. William talked about new security protocols, about the importance of trust and integrity, but Sarah barely listened. Her mind was elsewhere, processing everything that had happened. When the meeting ended, several colleagues approached Sarah. "You saved the company again," Margaret Thompson said, smiling. "Seems to be becoming a habit." "I just did my job," Sarah replied modestly. "No, you did more than that," Margaret insisted. "You paid attention. You cared. That's more than many people do." In the following weeks, the office dynamics changed. Without Jennifer and her negative influence, many employees began treating Sarah with more respect. Not everyone. There were still those who viewed her with suspicion or resentment, but it was progress. Robert, in particular, seemed to have had a change of perspective. He never apologized explicitly for the months of disparaging comments, but he started treating Sarah professionally, sometimes even asking for her opinion on technical issues. The second probationary month passed, then the third. Sarah continued to impress with her work. She wasn't just technically competent, but also demonstrated a quick learning ability and dedication that went beyond what was expected. Michael, who had initially been skeptical, was now one of her biggest supporters. "She's better than any IT assistant I've ever worked with," he told William in a review meeting. "She learns fast, thinks creatively to solve problems, and has a work ethic that puts half the team to shame." "And the cleaning tasks?" William asked. "Did she keep doing them?" "Every day," Michael confirmed. "She arrives early to clean the bathrooms, empties trash bins at the end of the day. Never complains, never delays, never lets the quality of any of the work slip." William nodded thoughtfully. The requirement for Sarah to continue with cleaning tasks had been partly a test of humility and commitment. He wanted to see if she truly valued the opportunity enough to swallow her pride, and she had passed that test with distinction. "I think we've seen enough," William said. "Schedule a meeting with her for Monday. Let's make it official." On Monday morning, Sarah was called to William's office. She went up with her heart pounding, not knowing exactly what to expect. The 3-month probation had technically ended, but she hadn't received any official communication about her future. Brian was there again, as was Michael. William gestured for her to sit. "Sarah, I called you here to discuss your future with the company," William began, and there was a small smile on his lips. "The last 3 months have been enlightening." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. This could be a good or bad sign. "You've demonstrated not only technical competence but also integrity, dedication, and a learning ability we rarely see," William continued. "Michael told me you're one of the best members of his team, and considering that you saved the company not once but twice, I'd be a fool not to recognize your value." "Thank you, sir," Sarah managed to say, her voice trembling slightly. "Therefore, I'm happy to offer you a permanent position as a junior IT analyst. The salary will be 4,500 rials per month, with the possibility of a raise after 6 months based on performance. And, of course, you won't need to do cleaning tasks anymore." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. 4,500 rials. It was more than double what she earned as a cleaner. It was enough to finally give Emily some of the things she had always wanted. It was the recognition she had dreamed of during all those late nights of studying. I don't know what to say," she managed to articulate. "Say you accept," Brian suggested with a smile. "I accept," Sarah said, and a tear finally escaped running down her cheek. "Thank you so much. You won't regret it." "I already know that," William said. "Now go celebrate and get ready, because I have a big new project coming next week, and I'll need your help." Sarah left the office in a state of euphoria. She wanted to run, shout, dance. Instead, she maintained her composure until she reached the bathroom, where she finally let the tears fall freely. They were tears of joy, of relief, of validation for all the years of sacrifice. When she told Emily that night, the girl jumped and shouted so loudly that the neighbors complained, but neither of them cared. That was a night to celebrate. "You did it, Mom," Emily kept saying, hugging Sarah. "You really did it." "We did it," Sarah corrected. "Because all these years you supported me, you believed. This is our success, not just mine." But the story doesn't end there, because Sarah's success was just the beginning of bigger changes. In the following months, Sarah continued to prove her worth repeatedly. She solved complex problems, helped implement new systems, and even started training new employees. Her knowledge and skill were undeniable, but she also began to notice something. With her own rise, she had become more aware of other employees who were often overlooked or underestimated. There was Carlos, the night security guard who spoke 3 languages but never had the opportunity to use those skills. There was Lucy from the pantry, who made incredible cakes and dreamed of having her own bakery but lacked startup capital. Sarah began to see patterns. The way employees in positions considered inferior were treated as invisible, how their talents and potential were wasted because no one bothered to ask, to look beyond the surface. And she decided to do something about it. She started small, talking to these employees, getting to know their stories, their dreams. Then she began to casually mention to Brian and Michael the hidden skills she had discovered. "Did you know Carlos speaks fluent Mandarin?" she mentioned once. "The company was thinking about expanding into the Chinese market, right? He could help with translations, with understanding the business culture. Or, Lucy makes the best sweets I've ever tasted. If the company wants to host that event for important clients, maybe we could hire her to make dessert instead of going to an expensive bakery." Small things, small steps. But gradually, Brian began to pay attention. He had seen firsthand how underestimating someone based on their position could lead to wasting incredible talent. He didn't want to repeat that mistake. 6 months after her official promotion, Sarah was in a management meeting, called by William. She had been promoted again, now to senior analyst, recognizing her ongoing contributions. "Sarah, you've not only transformed your own position in the company, but also brought positive changes in how we see and value all our employees," William said during the meeting. "That's why, in addition to your promotion, I'd like to propose something new, an internal employee development program, where we identify hidden talents at all levels of the company and offer training and growth opportunities. And we'd like you to coordinate this program." Sarah was speechless for a moment. An entire program dedicated to doing for others what had been done for her. It was more than she could have dreamed of. "It would be an honor," she said finally. The program started modestly. Sarah interviewed employees from all departments, identifying skills, interests, and potential. Carlos not only started helping with translations, but was eventually promoted to a position in the International Relations Department. Lucy opened her bakery with an interest-free loan from the company and now supplied sweets for all corporate events. And there were others, many others, each with their own story, their own dreams that had been ignored or dismissed. A year had passed since Sarah had received her first opportunity. It was a Friday evening, and the company was holding an event to celebrate the year's successes. Sarah was there, wearing a simple but elegant dress she had bought with her first bonus. Emily was with her, the night's special guest. The girl, now 16, had been accepted into a prestigious technical school with a full scholarship, studying computer science. Her dream was to follow in her mother's footsteps, but go even further. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," Emily said, holding Sarah's hand as they watched the other guests. "And I'm proud of you, sweetheart," Sarah replied. William stepped onto the small stage, set up in the event hall, to give a speech. He talked about the company's successes, the new contracts won, the successful projects. And then his voice grew softer, more personal. "But the greatest success this year wasn't measured in profits or contracts," he said. "It was measured in changed lives. It was measured in the internal development program that discovered and nurtured talents that were here all along, just waiting for an opportunity." His eyes found Sarah in the crowd. Sarah Johnson taught us a valuable lesson. She showed us that talent isn't limited to diplomas or social positions. That dedication and determination can overcome any obstacle. And most importantly, she taught us to look beyond appearances, to see the potential in every person, regardless of the role they hold. An applause started, small at first, then growing to fill the entire room. Sarah felt her face blush, tears of emotion in her eyes. "That's why, Sarah, I'd like to make an official announcement," William continued. You are being promoted to Coordinator of Human and Technological Development. You will be responsible not only for the internal development program, but also for helping shape this company's culture into one that values every person, every talent. The applause grew louder. Sarah could hardly believe it. From janitor to coordinator. It was a journey that seemed impossible just a year ago. She stepped onto the stage, her legs a bit shaky. William shook her hand and handed her the microphone. Sarah began, her voice faltering. She took a deep breath and tried again. A year ago, I was invisible in this company. I cleaned offices, emptied trash cans, and no one really saw me. I was just the janitor. She paused, looking at the crowd. She saw faces that had ignored her, some that had humiliated her. But she also saw those who had supported her, who had believed. But I wasn't just a janitor. I was a mother struggling to give her daughter a better future. I was a student, waking up before the sun to learn. I was a person with dreams, with potential, with so much to offer. And for a long time, no one saw that. Because it's easy not to see what we don't want to see. Her words fell over the room like stones in still water, creating waves of reflection. This company gave me an opportunity when I needed it most, Sarah continued. Brian, Michael, William, you bet on me when everyone else dismissed me, and for that, I am eternally grateful. But my gratitude comes with a responsibility. The responsibility to ensure that others aren't ignored like I was, that other talents aren't wasted. She looked directly at Emily. My daughter once told me that if I work hard and believe, I can achieve anything. And she was right. But the whole truth is that I've worked hard all my life. The difference was that finally, someone gave me the chance to show it. Sarah handed the microphone back to William and stepped off the stage to enthusiastic applause. Emily hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her young face. You're amazing, Mom, she whispered. We are amazing, Sarah corrected. Never forget that. 2 years had passed since that night. Sarah's internal development program had expanded significantly. Dozens of employees had been identified and received training, resulting in promotions, career changes, and dream fulfillments. Sarah's story had spread beyond the company. She began receiving invitations to speak at events, to share her experience with other organizations. She always accepted when she could, seeing it as an opportunity to inspire others. Emily was now in college, studying computer engineering with a full scholarship. She was one of the top students in her class, combining natural intelligence with the strong work ethic she learned from her mother. Sarah continued waking up early, but no longer at 4 in the morning. Now it was 6, a luxury that still made her smile. She used this time to plan her day, to study new technologies, to respond to emails from people who had reached out asking for advice or guidance. One Tuesday afternoon, Sarah was in her office when she received an unexpected visit. A young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, wearing a cleaning uniform. Sorry to bother you, Ma'am, the woman said timidly. My name is Ashley. I work in cleaning here in the building. Please come in, Sarah said, immediately recognizing the nervousness in the woman's posture. She had been in that same place before. How can I help you? I heard your story, Ashley said, sitting in the offered chair, about how you were a cleaner and studied to become an IT technician. And I'm studying too. At night I'm taking nursing courses. But it's hard, you know. Sometimes I think it's impossible, that people like me can't really change their lives. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. It was like looking into a mirror from the past. It's not impossible, she said firmly. It's hard, yes, very hard, but it's not impossible. And do you know why? Because you're already doing the hardest part. You're studying, you're trying, you haven't given up. But what if it's not enough? Ashley asked, and there was so much fear in her voice. What if I study all this and no one gives me a chance because I'm just a cleaner? Then you keep trying until you find someone who will, Sarah said. And in the meantime, you become so undeniably good at what you do that it becomes impossible to ignore. That's what I did. I studied until I mastered the subject, and when the opportunity came, I was ready. But you were lucky, Ashley pointed out, to be in the right place at the right time. Luck helps, Sarah admitted. But luck is when preparation meets opportunity. If I hadn't studied, if I didn't know how to solve those problems, it wouldn't matter where I was. Luck wouldn't have meant anything. They talked for an hour. Sarah shared her journey in detail, the highs and lows, the doubts and fears, and in the end she offered something she wished someone had offered her years ago. "If you want, I can help you," Sarah said. "I can review your study materials, give you advice about the nursing career. And when you're ready, I can help you find opportunities. I can't guarantee anything, but I can give you support." Ashley's eyes filled with tears. You would do that? For me?" "Of course," Sarah said, smiling, "because someone did it for me. And now it's my turn to do it for others." Ashley left the office with lighter steps, a renewed hope in her eyes. And Sarah knew she had made the right choice, because her journey wasn't just about her, it was about opening doors for others who came after. 3 years after her first opportunity, Sarah was sitting at a coffee table with Michael and Brian, discussing a new project. "The company is considering starting a scholarship program for employees' children," Brian explained, "and we wanted your opinion on how to structure it." Sarah smiled. 3 years ago, no one would have asked her opinion on anything beyond which cleaning product to use. Now she was helping shape company policies. "I think it's a wonderful idea," she said, "but I suggest expanding it, not just for employees' children, but for the employees themselves too. Scholarship programs for those who want to study, take courses, get certifications, investing in the people who already work here." "Like what you did for me," Michael said, nodding. "You know, you changed how I see my team. Now I always ask about their interests, their goals. I discovered one of our junior technicians plays guitar professionally. It has nothing to do with IT, but now I know more about him as a person." "That's what it's about," Sarah said. "Seeing people as complete human beings, not just employees performing roles. Each person has a story, has potential. We just need to take the time to get to know and nurture that potential." The scholarship program was implemented 3 months later. In the first year, 20 employees enrolled to study various fields, from full degrees to specific technical courses. The company covered the costs, and in return the employees agreed to stay with the company for at least 2 years after completing their studies. Ashley, the young woman who had approached Sarah asking for advice, was one of the first to enroll. She was now studying nursing with a full scholarship from the company, and just as Sarah had done, she woke up early, studied during breaks, and kept her grades impeccable. Emily had graduated with honors and received offers from multiple technology companies, but she chose to return to the company where her mother worked, wanting to be part of the culture Sarah had helped create. "I know I can earn more elsewhere," she explained to Sarah when announcing her decision. "But here I feel I can make a real difference. I can help continue the work you started." Sarah felt pride swell in her chest. Her daughter had not only achieved an education and a successful career, but had also absorbed the values Sarah had always tried to teach. That success isn't measured just in salary, but in impact, in how many lives you touch, how many doors you open. 4 years after that fateful morning when the system crashed, Sarah was standing on a much larger stage. She had been invited to speak at a national conference on human development and corporate inclusion. The auditorium was full, hundreds of people from all over the country. Executives, human resources managers, consultants, all wanting to hear about the innovative program she had helped create. Sarah looked at the crowd, and for a brief moment felt the old insecurity return. Who was she to be there? She who had been a cleaner, who still didn't have a formal college degree, who had learned everything on her own. But then she saw Emily sitting in the front row, smiling encouragingly. She saw William and Brian, who had flown in to be present. She saw Ashley, who was now in her final year of nursing. She saw Carlos, who had been promoted to manager of international relations. She saw Lucy, whose bakery now had 2 branches. She saw the impact of her journey reflected in all those lives, and she knew she belonged on that stage as much as anyone. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice firm and clear. "My name is Sarah Johnson, and 4 years ago I was an invisible cleaner. Today I'm going to tell you how we became visible." And she told. She told about the early mornings of study, about the humiliation of being mocked, about the chance that changed everything. But more importantly, she told about what came after, about creating systems that allow others to make the same journey, about challenging deep-seated prejudices, about seeing potential where others see only positions. Talent is everywhere, she concluded, her voice echoing through the silent auditorium. But opportunity is not, and that is the injustice we need to fix. Not with charity, but with genuine recognition that capability isn't limited to formal education or social class. That every person, no matter what uniform they wear or what job they do, deserves to be seen, heard, and valued. The room erupted in applause. People stood up, a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, but didn't wipe them away. They were tears of fulfillment, of knowing her message had been heard. After the conference, dozens of people approached her, executives wanting to implement similar programs in their companies, workers in humble positions seeking inspiration and advice, journalists wanting to tell her story. Among them was an older man, perhaps in his 70s, with white hair and gentle eyes. "Ms. Johnson," he said, extending his hand, "I'm Professor Harold Morrison from State University. I'd like to discuss something with you." "Of course," Sarah said, shaking his hand. "I was impressed with your presentation and with your story. You have extensive practical knowledge and proven results, but you don't have a formal degree, correct?" Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. Here it comes. The part where he'd say that despite everything she'd accomplished, it still wasn't enough because she lacked a piece of paper. "Correct," she admitted. "I never had the opportunity to complete a formal undergraduate degree." "Well, I'd like to change that," the professor said, smiling. "The university is launching a program for established professionals who've demonstrated excellence in their fields but lack formal education. Prior learning recognition, we call it. You would qualify. You could earn your computer science degree through a combination of exams, portfolio presentation, and some complementary courses." Sarah was speechless. Is that possible?" "Completely. In fact, I think it would be appropriate. You taught yourself through pure determination. It's time we gave that formal recognition. And afterward, if you're interested, there's an adjunct professor position waiting, teaching the next generation not just theory, but the practical reality of solving real problems." "Professor," Sarah said, her voice trembling, "I don't know what to say. It would be an honor." 5 years after the day that changed everything, Sarah was at her graduation ceremony. At 47 years old, she finally had the college degree she'd always dreamed of. But more than that, she had something much more valuable: the recognition that her path, though non-traditional, had been equally valid. Emily was there, now a successful software engineer. William and Brian, who had become more than bosses, but true friends. Michael, Ashley, Carlos, Lucy, all those whose lives had intertwined with hers. And when Sarah stepped up to receive her diploma, the entire audience stood up. Not just her friends and family, but everyone. Because her story had spread throughout the university, inspiring students and teachers alike. The dean made sure to give a special speech about her. "Sarah Johnson reminds us that education isn't just what happens in classrooms," he said. "It's what happens when a person refuses to accept limitations imposed by society, when they choose to learn, grow, improve, no matter the obstacles. She teaches us that it's never too late to start, that it's never impossible to change." After the ceremony, as people gathered for photos and celebrations, a shy young woman approached Sarah. "Professor Johnson," she said, though Sarah wasn't technically teaching yet. "Yes? My name is Grace. I'm a freshman here, and I come from a poor family. My parents work in farming. I got in here with a scholarship, but sometimes I feel like I don't belong, like everyone else knows something I don't." Sarah recognized the feeling immediately. She had felt exactly that. "You belong," she said firmly. "If you pass the admissions process, if you're here, you belong just as much as anyone else. And you know why? Because you fought harder than most to get here. That doesn't make you less qualified. It makes you stronger. But what if I'm not good enough? Then you study until you are. You work until you master the material. And when people doubt you, and they will doubt you, you use that doubt as fuel to prove them wrong." Grace smiled, tears of hope in her eyes. "Thank you, Professor." Sarah watched the girl walk away and felt that everything had come full circle. She had started as someone who needed encouragement. Now, she was in a position to offer it to others. 6 months later, Sarah began teaching at the university. She taught practical programming and problem-solving, subjects that combined theory with real-world application. Her students loved her because she brought real-world experience, because she understood their struggles, because she never made them feel small for not knowing something. And she always made extra time for students who came from humble backgrounds, who struggled not just with the material but with the feeling of not belonging. She had become the unofficial mentor to dozens of them, offering support that went beyond academics. At the company, the program she had started continued to flourish. More than 100 employees had been promoted or changed careers through it. The company culture had fundamentally changed, from one that valued only formal credentials to one that recognized potential and dedication in all forms. Brian had taken over as CEO when his father retired, and one of his first actions was to expand the development program to all the company's branches across the country. "You changed this company for the better," he told Sarah at a board meeting. "And now we're going to spread that change. Every office will have its own program, its own way of identifying and nurturing hidden talents." Sarah watched it all with a deep sense of accomplishment. She had started out just wanting a chance to improve her own life and her daughter's, but it had become something much bigger. It had become a movement. 7 years after that fateful day, Sarah received an unexpected invitation. The city mayor invited her to a meeting at City Hall. Curious, Sarah accepted. The mayor, a middle-aged woman with a determined air, got straight to the point. "Ms. Johnson, your story has inspired many people in this city." And it made me think, if a private company can implement such effective development and inclusion programs, why can't the public sector do the same? "The public sector," Sarah repeated, surprised. "Yes, we have thousands of public employees, many in basic service positions, underestimated and undervalued. But I'm sure that among them there are incredible talents waiting for opportunities. I'd like you to help us create a similar program for City Hall." It was a huge challenge. The public sector had its own rules, its own bureaucracies, but it also had the potential to impact many more lives. It would require support from the City Council, Sarah pointed out, budget, regulatory changes. "I've already spoken with leaders from all parties," the mayor said. "Your story transcends politics. Everyone agrees it's something worth trying." Sarah accepted the challenge. She spent the next few months working with City Hall teams, adapting the program to the realities of the public sector. It was difficult. She encountered bureaucratic resistance and skepticism, but she also found many people eager for change. The program was launched a year later. In the first cycle, it identified 50 public employees with untapped potential, a school custodian who spoke 4 languages and became a translator for the tourism department, a bus driver who had a natural talent for negotiation and was trained in community conflict mediation, a daycare cook who created amazing nutritious recipes and was promoted to coordinate school meals across the entire city. Each story was unique, each one proof that talent exists everywhere, waiting only to be seen and nurtured. The media began to pay attention. Reports about the program appeared in national newspapers, on TV shows. Sarah's story was told and retold, each time reaching more people. Other cities began to make contact. Companies from other states wanted to implement similar programs. Sarah found herself traveling across the country, giving lectures, consulting, inspiring. But she always returned home. To Emily, who was now engaged to a fellow engineer. To the company where it all began, where she still maintained her position. And to the university where her students awaited her. And once a week, without fail, she visited a public school in a poor neighborhood. She talked with the students, especially the older ones, those about to enter the job market. She told her story, answered questions, offered hope. "You can be anything," she always said. "It doesn't matter where you were born, what jobs your parents have, whether you have money or not. If you have determination, if you're willing to work hard and never give up, you can be anything. But what if no one gives us a chance? A boy asked during one of these visits. Then you create your own chances, Sarah replied. You study until you're so good that no one can ignore you. And in the meantime, you look for people who will support you, not those who will bring you down. Because those people exist, sometimes in unexpected places. But they exist. 8 years after it all began, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Sarah was sitting in the small apartment where she still lived with Emily. Yes, she could afford to move to something bigger now. But that place had memories, had history. It was where she had struggled, where she had dreamed, where she had studied late into the night. Emily entered the living room, dressed for her wedding that would take place in a few hours. "Mom, I need help with the veil," she said, but stopped when she saw the expression on Sarah's face. "What is it?" "I was just thinking," Sarah said, smiling through the tears that threatened to fall. "About everything that's changed. About how 8 years ago I was cleaning offices, being treated as invisible. And now you've changed hundreds of lives," Emily finished, sitting beside her mother, "including mine." "Everything I did was for you," Sarah said. "I know, and I hope to be at least half the woman you are." Mother and daughter embraced, tears of happiness finally falling. It was a moment of reflection, of gratitude, of recognition of how far they had come. The wedding was beautiful, small and intimate, just close friends and family. But among the guests were people from all walks of Sarah's life. William and Brian, representing where it all began. Professor Harold, who had given her the chance at a formal education. The mayor, with whom she now worked on inclusion projects. And dozens of people whose lives Sarah had touched over the years. When the time came for the mother of the bride's speech, Sarah stood up, her heart too full to contain. "Emily," she began, her voice choked, "when you were born, I was a young single mother with little education and few prospects, but looking at you, so small and perfect, gave me purpose. You became my why. The reason I woke up early, studied when I was exhausted, never gave up even when it seemed impossible." She paused, looking at all the guests. "But what I didn't expect was that you would be just the beginning. That the journey I started for you would expand to touch so many other lives. Every person who received a second chance, every talent that was discovered, every dream that was fulfilled, it all started because I had a daughter worth fighting for." Sarah turned her gaze to Emily. "So thank you, my daughter, for being my inspiration, for believing in me when I barely believed in myself, for always reminding me that it's worth dreaming big, no matter where you come from. You are, and always will be, my greatest achievement." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the toughest men discreetly wiped away tears. 9 years after the day that changed everything, Sarah received surprising news. She had been nominated for a National Social Entrepreneurship Award. The award recognized people who had made a significant impact in their communities through innovation and inclusion. The ceremony would be in the capital, a major event with national authorities in attendance. Sarah almost declined, feeling uncomfortable with all the attention, but Emily convinced her. "Mom, this isn't about you showing off," Emily said. "It's about bringing visibility to the cause. The more people know that change is possible, the more places will implement similar programs. You owe it to all the people out there who are still invisible, who are still waiting for their chance." Emily was right, as always. So Sarah went. The ceremony was grand, much more than she expected. There were incredible nominees, people who had done wonderful things. Sarah didn't think she had a chance of winning, but when they announced her name as the winner, the auditorium erupted in applause. She walked onto the stage in a state of shock, accepting the trophy with trembling hands. The host asked for a few words. Sarah looked at the audience, at the cameras, knowing her image was being broadcast nationwide. "I don't know if I deserve this award," she began honestly, "because all I did was fight for my survival and my daughter's. I didn't start out wanting to change the world. I just wanted a chance to prove my worth." She gripped the trophy tightly in her hands. "But what I've learned on this journey is that every person has value. It doesn't matter what job they do, how much they earn, or what education they have. Every person has something unique to offer, and our society loses so much when we don't recognize that, when we let talents wither just because they come in packages we don't expect. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. So if this award means anything, let it mean a commitment to truly see each other, to give chances to people who normally don't get them, to recognize that janitors can be programmers, that security guards can be translators, that cooks can be managers, that a human being is far more complex and capable than any job description. The applause was deafening, but more important to Sarah were the messages she received afterward. Hundreds of them from people in situations similar to the one she had been in. Janitors, drivers, cooks, security guards, all saying she had given them hope. That if she could do it, maybe they could too. And she replied to each one personally when she could, offering encouragement, practical advice, contacts when she had them. Because if there was one thing her journey had taught her, it was the importance of paying it forward. 10 years, a decade since that morning when the system crashed and changed everything. Sarah was now 52, hair beginning to grey at the temples, deeper lines around her eyes. But there was also a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a sense of purpose and fulfillment. She was at the top of the company building, now much larger than it was 10 years ago, looking out at the city stretching below her. This is where it all began. In this building, in this company, with that moment of decision to touch a keyboard even knowing she would be ridiculed. "Found you here." Brian's voice came from behind her. Sarah turned and smiled. Just reflecting. It's the 10-year anniversary today since the day that changed everything. "I know," Brian said, joining her at the ledge. "It's not something anyone would forget. That day when I saw you being humiliated but still determined to help, something changed in me too." "How so?" "It made me question many things. About privilege, about meritocracy, about how we treat people based on superficial assumptions. It made me a better CEO, but more than that, it made me a better person." They fell silent for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of all that had changed in a decade. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said finally. "Sometimes I still dream that I'm cleaning offices. I wake up with that feeling that it was all just a dream and I'll have to go back to my blue uniform." "And how do you feel when you wake up and realize it's real?" "Grateful, every day, grateful, but also with the weight of responsibility. Because I know that for every person like me who got a chance, there are thousands who didn't, and that keeps me up at night." Brian nodded, understanding completely. "That's why the work continues. We've expanded the program to 15 states now, over 3,000 lives changed directly, and if we count the families affected, it's more than 10,000 people." "But it's not enough," Sarah said, not as a criticism, but as a statement. "It will never be enough as long as there's even one talented person being wasted because someone decided they weren't worth it, based on appearances." It was at that moment that Sarah's phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she answered anyway. "Hello? Ms. Johnson, my name is Deborah Turner. I'm a producer for a documentary and would like to talk about making a film about your story and the impact of the programs you helped create." Sarah hesitated. She had turned down several similar offers over the years, always uncomfortable with being the center of attention. "I don't know if—" "Please hear my proposal first," Deborah gently interrupted. "It wouldn't just be about you. It would be about all the people whose lives were transformed, the Ashleys, the Carloses, the Lucys. It would show the world that systematic change is possible. That when we give the right people chances, everyone wins." Sarah looked at Brian, who had overheard part of the conversation, and nodded encouragingly. "All right," she said finally. "Let's talk." The documentary took a year to produce. The crew followed Sarah in her daily life, interviewed dozens of people who had been impacted by the programs, visited companies and public agencies that had implemented similar initiatives. It was an emotionally intense process. Sarah had to relive many painful moments, tell stories of humiliation she would rather forget. But there were also moments of deep joy, seeing how much things had really changed. One of the most powerful scenes in the documentary was filmed one morning when Sarah returned to the building where it all began, went down to the floor where she used to store her cleaning supplies. The small closet was still there, now used by another cleaning crew. "This is where I kept my bucket, my rags," she said to the camera, her voice choked. "I would stand here sometimes, just for a few minutes, trying to pull myself together after a particularly cruel comment or an especially tough day." She touched the closet door. "I never imagined that 10 years later I'd be coming back here as a coordinator, as a university professor, as someone who really matters. If I could go back in time and tell the Sarah from 10 years ago that everything would be okay, that all the pain was worth it, I don't know if she would believe it." "Would you believe it?" the director asked from behind the camera. Sarah thought carefully before answering. "I think the part of her that woke up at 4 in the morning to study would believe it. That part never gave up on dreaming. But the part that was humiliated daily, that constantly heard she wasn't enough, that part would doubt. And that's why encouragement work is so important, because doubt kills more dreams than failure ever will." Another memorable scene was filmed during a development program meeting. There were now 20 coordinators, each responsible for a different region. They shared success stories, discussed challenges, planned expansions. The camera captured the moment when Ashley, now a graduated nurse working at a public hospital, presented her own proposal. She wanted to create a sub-program specifically focused on healthcare professionals, identifying talent among technicians, assistants, and other staff who could be trained for more advanced positions. "Mrs. Johnson gave me a chance when I needed it most," Ashley said, emotional. "Now I want to do the same for others in healthcare. There are so many nursing assistants with potential to become nurses, so many nurses who could become doctors if they had support and opportunity." Seeing Ashley, who had come to her as a young cleaner full of doubts, now leading her own initiative, was one of the proudest moments in Sarah's life. The documentary didn't hide the challenges and failures either. It interviewed people who had been skeptical about the programs, some who still were. It showed cases where things didn't work out, where people got chances but couldn't take advantage of them for various reasons. "Not everyone will succeed," Sarah admitted in an interview, "and that's okay. What matters is that everyone gets the opportunity to try, that no one is discarded without even having the chance to show what they're capable of." During filming, something unexpected happened. The crew was interviewing former company employees when Robert, the one who had been one of the cruelest to Sarah, showed up. He no longer worked there, having been fired years ago for poor performance, but heard about the documentary and asked to speak. "Can I have a few minutes?" he asked, and there was something in his eyes that made Sarah agree. The cameras rolled as he sat across from Sarah. He had aged poorly, looking much older than his mid-40s. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he began, and his voice was genuinely broken. "For how I treated you, for the things I said. You didn't deserve any of that." Sarah remained silent, letting him continue. "I was jealous, you know," he admitted. "You had so little but were so determined. You studied while I wasted my nights. You fought for something while I just complained. And when you started succeeding, it exposed how mediocre I was, so I tried to bring you down so I wouldn't have to face my own failures." "Why are you telling me this now?" Sarah asked, her voice neutral. "Because I lost my job, my family, almost everything. And at rock bottom I realized the only person I could blame was myself. You were a mirror showing what I could be if I really tried. And instead of inspiring me, I let it fill me with bitterness." He quickly wiped his eyes. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know I was wrong. About everything. And if there's any lesson in my life, it's what happens when you waste talent through laziness and then blame others for your failure." Sarah looked at this man who had tormented her and felt not anger but pity. "Robert, we all have the capacity to change," she finally said. "If you truly want to do things differently, it's not too late. It's never too late. At 47, without a job, who's going to give me a chance? Someone gave me a chance at 42, Sarah pointed out, and I was a cleaner. You have a formal education, professional experience. If you really want to change, find something you love, something worth fighting for. And then fight for it." It was a powerful moment that ended up in the documentary, showing not only Sarah's journey, but her impact even on someone who had been cruel to her. The documentary was released 1.5 years later. It premiered at a film festival, won several awards, and eventually became available on a popular streaming platform. The response was overwhelming. Millions of people watched it in the first few weeks. Social media exploded with discussions about class, opportunity, and the value of giving people chances. Companies began to be pressured by employees to implement similar programs. But the deepest impact was on ordinary people. Cleaners, drivers, security guards, cooks, all those in jobs considered humble, started sending messages to Sarah, thousands of them. "You made me believe I can be more. I started studying after watching your documentary. I showed your story to my daughter. Now she wants to be a programmer. I've worked in cleaning for 20 years. I always wanted to be more. Thank you for reminding me it's not too late." Sarah tried to reply to as many as she could, but it was impossible to keep up with the volume. So she created something different, a foundation. The Sarah Johnson Foundation would be dedicated to providing scholarships, mentorship, and support for workers in service positions who wanted to change careers. Emily took on much of the organizational work of the foundation, combining her technical skills with Sarah's vision, mother and daughter working together to amplify the impact. In the first year, the foundation managed to support 200 people. In the second, 500. The growth was steady, fueled by donations from companies that had been touched by the story, from inspired individuals, from organizations that saw the value of the work. But Sarah never forgot her roots. Once a month, without fail, she returned to the company where it all began and had lunch with the current cleaning staff. She talked with each person, asked about their lives, their dreams, their struggles. It was during one of these lunches that she met Rita, a 58-year-old woman who had worked in cleaning for over 30 years. "Do you have any dreams, Rita?" Sarah asked, as she did with everyone. Rita laughed, a tired sound. "Dreams are for the young, Ms. Johnson. At my age, I just think about holding on until retirement." 58 isn't old, Sarah insisted. "You still have many years ahead. If you could do anything without limits, what would it be?" Rita was silent for a long moment, as if no one had ever asked her that question before. "I've always enjoyed cooking," she said finally. "Not fancy food, no, but real food, food that feeds the soul. I always dreamed of having a small restaurant, serving home-cooked meals for workers, a place where no one leaves hungry." "Why didn't you ever try?" "I don't have the money to start. I don't know how to run a business." "And who's going to lend money to an old cleaner?" "The foundation lends," Sarah said. "Interest-free loans to start small businesses, and we offer a basic management course. If you're serious about this, I can help you." Rita's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that? For me? Why not? Someone did it for me. Now it's my turn to do it for you." 6 months later, Rita opened her small restaurant in a working-class neighborhood. It was simple, just 10 tables, but the food was exceptional and the prices were fair. Workers in the area quickly made it their favorite lunch spot. Sarah was there on the day of the inauguration, and seeing the pride on Rita's face, watching her fulfill a dream at nearly 60 years old, was further confirmation that it's never too late to start over. But not everything was easy victories. Sarah's work also attracted criticism. Some said she was creating unrealistic expectations, that not everyone could succeed like she had. Others argued that the programs were too expensive, that the money could be better used elsewhere. Sarah faced these criticisms head-on. In a particularly tense television interview, an economist argued that her programs weren't sustainable long-term. "The numbers don't add up," he said. "You're investing millions in a few hundred people. That money could create more impact if distributed differently." "You're thinking in purely economic terms," Sarah replied calmly. "But there's value that can't be measured in spreadsheets. When you transform a life, you're not just changing that person. You're changing their family, their children, their community. The impact multiplies in ways no calculation can predict. But you agree that not everyone will succeed. Of course, but that's no reason not to try. How many incredible talents are we wasting right now because we assume people in certain positions have no potential? The cost of that is much greater than any investment in giving chances." The interview went viral, generating even more discussion about the topic. And while there were critics, there were far more supporters, people who understood that creating opportunities wasn't waste, but investment in the future. 11 years after it all began, Sarah received an even more surprising invitation. The Department of Labor wanted to hire her as a consultant to develop a national program which would be implemented in all federal public agencies. It was a huge opportunity, but also frightening. Working at a national level meant dealing with more bureaucracy, more resistance, more complexity than she had ever faced. "What do you think?" she asked Emily one night while reviewing the proposal. "I think you're scared," Emily answered honestly. "And I think you should do it exactly because of that." "That doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense. When you were scared to touch that keyboard 10 years ago, you did it anyway. When you were scared to start IT studies, you did it anyway. Fear never stopped you before. Why would it stop you now?" Emily was right. Sarah accepted the position. The next 2 years were some of the most challenging of her life. Working on a national scale was completely different. There were politics to navigate, egos to manage, budgets to justify. She encountered resistance at levels she had never imagined. But she also found unexpected allies, public servants at all levels who were tired of the status quo, who wanted to see real change. Together, they developed a comprehensive program that could, eventually, impact thousands of people. The program was officially launched 3 years after Sarah started working on it. The launch ceremony was in the Capitol, with ministers, governors, and authorities from across the country in attendance. When it was time for Sarah to speak, she looked at the audience, at all those powerful people, and thought of the woman she had been, the invisible cleaning lady nobody really saw. How could she have imagined that one day she would be on that stage? "This program isn't about me," she began. "It's about every American who wakes up early, works hard, but is constantly told their place is there and nothing more. It's about recognizing that our society loses when we waste talent based on class prejudices." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But one program alone won't solve everything. Laws and policies are important, but what really needs to change are our hearts, our minds. We need to stop looking at people and seeing only their positions. We need to start seeing their potential, their dreams, their full humanity." The speech was applauded, but Sarah knew words were easy. The true measure of success would be in the following years, seeing if the program would really make a difference. And it did. Slowly, challengingly, but it did. In the first year, 2,000 federal public employees were identified and received training for new positions. In the second year, it was 5,000. The program began to gain momentum. Stories started to appear. A security guard who became a cybersecurity analyst, a hospital cook who was trained in nutrition and now developed therapeutic menus, a driver who became a logistics coordinator. Each story was unique, but they all shared the same theme. Talent had been there all along, just waiting to be recognized. Sarah turned 55. She looked in the mirror and saw grayer hair, more lines on her face, but she also saw something that wasn't there before: peace, fulfillment, the knowledge that her life had meaning, that she had made a real difference. Emily had given her a grandson, a boy named Ethan, after one of the first people Sarah had helped through the program years ago. Holding that baby, knowing he would grow up in a slightly fairer world because of the work she had done, was an indescribable joy. It was during a visit to her grandson that Sarah received a call that brought her to tears. It was from Jennifer, the woman who had been fired for leaking information, who had been one of her biggest tormentors. "Sarah, I don't know if you'll want to talk to me," Jennifer began, her voice hesitant. "I'm listening," Sarah said, curious. "I watched the documentary. I read about your work. And I realized how terrible I was. Not just with you, but with so many others. I've spent the last few years working on it, in therapy, trying to understand why I was so cruel." "And did you find out?" "Insecurity. Fear that if other people succeeded, it would somehow diminish mine. As if there were a limited amount of worth in the world, and giving it to someone meant having less for me." Sarah listened in silence, letting Jennifer continue. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I've changed." I now work with a non-profit that helps women re-enter the workforce after difficult periods. It's my way of trying to make up for it, even if it's never enough. Jennifer, Sarah said gently, we all deserve second chances. I believe that. If you've truly changed, if you're doing good now, then that's forgiveness enough. Thank you, Jennifer whispered. You had no obligation to be kind to me. No, I didn't, but I choose to be anyway. Because holding a grudge would only hurt me, not you. After hanging up, Sarah stared at the phone for a long time. She had forgiven Jennifer, truly, because she learned that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of carrying resentment. 14 years after the day that changed everything, Sarah was preparing a speech to give at an international conference when she received troubling news. William, the man who had given her the first opportunity, was sick, cancer, in an advanced stage. She went to visit him in the hospital immediately. She found him frail, unrecognizable from the robust and intimidating man he had been, but his eyes still had that same sharpness. Sarah, he said when she entered, a faint smile on his lips. I thought you would come. How could I not come, she said, sitting by the bed. You changed my life. No, you changed your own life. I just wasn't foolish enough to stand in the way. They talked for hours. William spoke about regrets, about missed opportunities, about how he wished he had started the development program earlier. Think of how many people we could have helped if I hadn't been so blind for so long, he said, sadness in his voice. But you changed, Sarah pointed out. When you were challenged, when you were forced to confront your prejudices, you changed. How many men in your position would do the same? Not enough. No, not enough. But you did. And because of that, thousands of lives were transformed. That's not small, William, that's legacy. He held her hand, his fingers weak but firm. Promise me one thing. Anything. Keep going. Even when it's hard. Even when it seems impossible. Keep giving people chances. Because you're right. Talent is everywhere. It just needs to be seen. I promise, Sarah said, tears running down her face. William passed away 3 weeks later. The funeral was large, with hundreds of people attending. But what Sarah would remember most were the dozens of employees, many of them beneficiaries of the program, who came to pay their respects. Each with a story about how William, by giving Sarah that first chance, had changed their lives too. Brian, who had lost his father and uncle within 2 years, held himself with dignity. But when he and Sarah were alone after the funeral, he finally allowed himself to cry. He was so proud of you, you know, Brian said between sobs. He always talked about you, about how you made him a better person. He taught me that it's never too late to change, Sarah replied, hugging him. That even people in positions of power can learn and grow. William's death was a harsh reminder of mortality, of the limited time everyone has, but it also reinforced for Sarah the importance of her work. Time may be short, but the impact can last for generations. 15 years, a decade and a half since that morning when everything changed. Sarah was now at the peak of her career. Her foundation had grown to become one of the largest career development organizations for low-income workers in the country. The national program she had helped develop was now in its 5th iteration, constantly improving and expanding. But what made her most proud wasn't the numbers or awards. It was the stories, the thousands of stories of people who had transformed their lives. Like Mark, a former security guard who was now a lawyer, having studied law through a foundation scholarship. Like Beatrice, a former cook who now owned 3 restaurants. Like Robert, a former driver who became a math teacher, inspiring young people from poor communities to believe they could also achieve academic success. Each story was a reminder of why the work mattered. It was during a conference that Sarah had a moment of revelation. She was watching a panel about the future of work when she heard a young tech executive talk about how her company valued degrees and pedigree above all else. But how do you ensure quality if you don't have those filters? The executive asked, genuinely confused. Sarah raised her hand and was called on. If I may make an observation, she began, those filters don't guarantee quality. They just limit your talent pool to people who had the privilege of access to formal education. You miss incredible talents because you're looking in the wrong places. But we have to have some criteria, the executive argued. Of course. But how about testing actual skills, giving practical projects, assessing problem-solving ability instead of where someone studied? There are so many better ways to evaluate potential than just looking at a degree. The conversation continued, and Sarah realized something. After 15 years of work, she had helped thousands of people. But there were millions still waiting for opportunities. The problem wasn't just creating development programs. It was changing the fundamental mindset about how society values and assesses people. It was this revelation that led her to write a book. Not an autobiography, although her story was intertwined, but a manifesto about how to reimagine talent development, about why society needs to stop wasting people based on class prejudices. The book took 2 years to write. Emily helped with research and editing. Brian wrote the preface. Dozens of people whose lives had been transformed contributed their stories. When it was finally published, it became an unexpected bestseller. Not because Sarah was a brilliant writer, but because it touched on something many people felt but couldn't articulate: the injustice of a system that discards talent based on superficial appearances. The book generated even more invitations for lectures, consultations, interviews. Sarah, who at 42 was an invisible cleaner, at 57 was one of the most recognized voices in the field of human development and social inclusion. But success also brought challenges. The more visible she became, the more scrutiny she faced. Investigative journalists began examining every aspect of her life, looking for inconsistencies, for flaws. And they found something. An article was published revealing that Emily, during her college years, had received financial help from William and Brian, in addition to official scholarships. The article insinuated that Sarah and Emily's success was less about merit and more about favoritism. The controversy exploded. Critics argued that Sarah was hypocritical, preaching meritocracy while her own daughter received special treatment. Defenders countered that helping someone didn't diminish their achievements. Sarah was devastated, not by the criticism itself, but by the possibility that her work could be discredited, that all the people she had helped might have their achievements questioned by association. It was Emily who pulled her out of the spiral of anxiety. "Mum, let me clarify this," she said. "I'll make a public statement." "No, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. Because the truth matters." Emily gave a lengthy television interview, explaining the whole situation. Yes, she had received extra financial help, because the scholarship covered tuition, but not books, not transportation, not the hundreds of small expenses that come with a college education. William and Brian offered help not as a favor, but because they recognized that Emily worked harder than any other student, maintaining perfect grades while also working part-time. "But here's what the critics don't understand," Emily said, looking directly at the camera. "Help isn't cheating. All students from wealthy families get help. Their parents pay for everything, pay for tutors, pay for the security of never having to worry about money while studying. Why is it that when a poor person receives similar help, suddenly it's wrong?" She took a deep breath before continuing. "The problem isn't that I received help. It's that so few people like me receive it. It's that most poor students have to work 40 hours a week while studying, have to choose between buying a book or eating, have to drop out because the burden is too much. I don't apologize for receiving help. I'm ashamed that our society doesn't offer that help to everyone who needs it." The interview changed the narrative. Instead of being about alleged favoritism, it became about systemic inequality, about how society makes it almost impossible for poor people to succeed and then blames them for not succeeding. The controversy eventually passed, but it left Sarah more determined. She expanded the Foundation's work to include not only job training, but also comprehensive financial support for low-income students. Because Emily was right, talent and hard work aren't enough when you're constantly worried about having money for transportation, for food, for books. 17 years after the beginning, Sarah was walking through the halls of the company where it had all started when she heard familiar voices. They were employees from the new cleaning crew talking during a break. "Did you see that article about Sarah Johnson?" a young voice said. "I did. It's amazing, isn't it? She worked right here doing what we do. Do you think we could do something like that too?" "I don't know. She seems to have been special, you know, like exceptionally smart." Sarah stopped, hidden around a corner, listening. "I don't think she was special," another voice replied, older. "I think she was normal, like us. The difference is she didn't accept what everyone said about her. That a cleaner is just a cleaner. She decided to be more. But it's so hard, studying after a whole day of cleaning. It's hard, but it's not impossible. She proved that." Sarah smiled and decided to reveal herself. She entered the break room where the three women were sitting. They recognized her immediately, eyes wide. "Sorry, we didn't mean to be talking about you." "It's okay," Sarah said, sitting down with them. "In fact, I'm glad you were, because I want you to know something important. I wasn't special. I didn't have superpowers. I wasn't a genius. I was just a desperate woman trying to build a better life." She looked at each of them. "If you want to try something different, if you have dreams that go beyond cleaning, I will help you. Not just through the foundation, but personally. Because that's what we do. We help each other. We open doors. We give chances." The three women looked at each other, then at Sarah. And in their eyes, Sarah saw the same mix of hope and fear she had felt years ago. The hope that change was possible, the fear that it wasn't. "Think about it," Sarah said, leaving business cards. "When you're ready, look me up." Two of the three women eventually reached out to her. One wanted to study accounting, the other, interior design. And just like Sarah years before, they started by waking up early, studying during breaks, fighting for something greater. 18 years, almost 2 decades since that fateful day. Sarah was now nearing 60. Her hair was more white than brown. Her hands showed years of hard work. But her eyes still shone with the same determination. The foundation now had offices in every state. The national program had helped more than 50,000 people. The book she wrote was being used as a text in college courses on social development. But perhaps her greatest pride was something simpler. It was knowing that in companies across the country, in public agencies, in communities, there were people who had been invisible and were now seen, who had been discarded and were now valued. Emily had 2 children now. Ethan, the oldest, was 5, and Sophie, the youngest, had just turned 2. Watching these grandchildren grow up, knowing they would grow up in a world where their grandmother was someone respected, where their mother was a successful professional, was a joy Sarah could never have imagined possible 20 years ago. It was on a Sunday afternoon during a family lunch that Ethan asked an innocent question that touched Sarah deeply. "Grandma, is it true you were a cleaner?" "Yes, it's true," Sarah replied, "but now you're important." Sarah laughed, but the question made her think. "You know, Ethan, I was always important. Even when I was a cleaner. Because every job is important. Everyone is important. What changed wasn't my importance, but how many people could see it. I didn't understand. You'll understand when you grow up. But what I want you to always remember is, never judge a person by the job they do. Always look at their heart, at their dreams, at the kind of person they are. Promise." "I promise, Grandma." In that moment, Sarah knew her work had real meaning, because it wasn't just about changing lives now, it was about changing the next generation, teaching different values, creating a world where fewer people would be invisible. 19 years after the day that changed everything, Sarah was invited back to the building where she had worked as a cleaner for a special ceremony. The company was launching a training program that would bear her name, the Sarah Johnson Internal Development Program. When she arrived, she found not only current employees but dozens of people whose lives she had touched over the years. Ashley was there, now a nursing supervisor. Carlos, manager of international relations. Lucy, owner of 3 bakeries. Rita, whose homemade food was now served in 5 restaurants. And there were others. Mark, the lawyer. Beatrice, the businesswoman. Robert, the teacher. Each representing a transformed life, a realized potential. Brian, now CEO with hair starting to grey, gave the opening speech. 19 years ago, this company almost lost an important contract due to a technical failure, he began. But on that day, something much more important happened. A woman everyone had ignored, everyone had underestimated, showed us the cost of our prejudices. Sarah Johnson not only saved that contract, she saved our humanity. He gestured to the plaque being unveiled at the entrance of the training center. This program bears her name not just to honor her, but to remind everyone who enters here that potential has no face, no social class, no specific background. That our responsibility is to look beyond the obvious, to give chances where others see only obstacles. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she was too emotional to completely trust her voice, but she took a deep breath and began. When I was a cleaner in this building, I used to daydream sometimes. I dreamed of a day when I would be seen, when I would be respected. But never, not in my wildest dreams, did I imagine anything like this. She looked around at all those familiar faces. This program that bears my name isn't about me. It's about all of you. About every person who was ignored but refused to disappear. About every talent that was wasted but found its way. About every dream that was ridiculed but became reality. Sarah paused, choosing her next words carefully. 19 years ago, I touched a keyboard even though I knew I'd be ridiculed. I did it not because I was brave, but because I was desperate. Desperate for a chance to show I was more than what people saw. And when that chance was given, I promised myself I would never let another person feel as invisible as I felt. She looked at every person in the room. This is my promise to you. As long as I have a voice, I will use it to amplify the voices of the invisible. As long as I have power, I will use it to open doors for those who always found them closed. As long as I have resources, I will use them to create opportunities where there were once only obstacles. The room erupted in applause. Tears streamed down many faces, because everyone there knew deeply and personally what Sarah was talking about. Many of them had been invisible too, and now they were being seen. After the ceremony, Sarah found a quiet moment alone on the rooftop, looking out at the city stretching below her. It was there that Emily found her. Thinking about how everything has changed, Emily asked, joining her mother. Thinking about how everything almost didn't change, Sarah corrected. If that system hadn't crashed exactly when it did, if Brian hadn't been there to defend me, if William hadn't been willing to change his ideas, so many moments where things could have gone differently. But they didn't. You created your own opportunities. Not alone, never alone. I needed people willing to give chances, to believe, to support. And that's what I want people to understand. Change doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when communities decide to value all their members, when people in power decide to use that power to lift others up, when society decides that everyone deserves dignity and opportunity. Do you really think we've changed anything? Emily asked. Or is it just a drop in the ocean? Sarah thought carefully before answering. It is a drop, but oceans are made of drops, and every life we transform creates ripples that touch other lives. We won't fix everything. There will still be injustice, there will still be wasted people, but we made a difference for those we could reach, and we taught others to do the same. That's not small. 20 years, 2 full decades since that morning when the system crashed and changed everything. The company organized a big celebration, inviting not only current employees but everyone who had been through the development programs over the years. The hall was packed, hundreds of people, each with their own story of transformation. Sarah moved among them, listening, hugging, celebrating. That's when she saw a face she didn't expect. Robert. He was at the back of the hall, hesitant, as if unsure if he should be there. Sarah approached him. Robert, you came. I wasn't going to, he admitted. But I felt I had to thank you. Thank me? But you... When you told me it wasn't too late to change, I didn't believe it. But those words stayed with me. And eventually I tried. I went back to school, got a job at a public school as an administrative assistant. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. And for the first time in years, I'm proud of myself. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. I'm proud of you too. It takes far more courage to admit a mistake and change than to never make one in the first place. "Why are you kind to me?" Robert asked, genuinely confused. "I was so cruel to you." "Because holding a grudge would only hurt me, and because I believe in second chances, third chances, as many chances as it takes for someone to find their best self." Robert quickly wiped his eyes. "The world needs more people like you." "No, the world needs more people willing to be their best versions, people like you who recognize mistakes and make the effort to change. That's what will make a real difference." When the celebration reached its peak, Brian asked for everyone's attention. There was one last announcement to make. "As you all know, today marks 20 years since Sarah Johnson transformed this company, and by extension, thousands of lives," he began. "During these 2 decades, we've seen real change, but the work is far from over." He paused dramatically. "That's why I'm proud to announce that my family is donating 10 million Rs to the Sarah Johnson Foundation. This money will create a permanent fund that will ensure the work of giving opportunities continues for generations." The room fell into shocked silence for a moment, then erupted in applause. Sarah was speechless. 10 million. It was more money than she could have imagined. "But there's more," Brian continued. "Inspired by this example, 5 other companies have committed to similar donations. Together, we will create a fund of 60 million Rs dedicated to talent development for low-income workers across the country." Sarah felt her legs go weak. Emily was by her side, holding her arm for support. 60 million. The impact this could have. The lives it could change. "Sarah, you taught us that investing in people isn't charity. It's justice. It's recognizing that every person has value, every talent deserves a chance. We can't undo years of injustice, but we can start building something better," Brian concluded, looking directly at her. That night back at home, Sarah was quiet. Emily, knowing her mother, understood she was processing not just the day, but everything that had led to it. "Are you okay, Mom?" she finally asked. "I'm thinking," Sarah replied, "about that 42-year-old woman who cleaned offices, who was invisible, who studied in secret because she was ashamed of someone finding out and mocking her. She could never have imagined this, any part of it. But she deserved every second," Emily said firmly. "No one deserves or doesn't deserve. It's not about deserving. It's about opportunity, about timing, about the right people being willing to help at the right moment." Sarah turned to face her daughter. "And that's why the work is so important. Because there are thousands of women like I was, cleaning offices, serving coffee, driving buses, preparing food, each with their own dreams, their own skills, their own potential. And most will never have the luck I had. They'll never have the right moment, the right boss, the right chance." "Then we create more chances," Emily said. "That's what the money is for, so that luck isn't necessary. So that opportunity is structural, not accidental." Sarah smiled. Her daughter had learned well. In the following months, the Sarah Johnson Foundation underwent massive expansion. With 60 million Rs in funding, they could hire more staff, open more offices, reach more people. The goal was ambitious, to help 10,000 people in the next 5 years. But the number was only part of the story. The foundation also began working with companies and governments to change hiring policies, to implement anti-bias training, to create systems where talent could be recognized regardless of background. It was slow work, frustrating at times. But gradually, changes began to appear. More companies implementing internal development programs, more schools offering support for low-income students, more stories of people transforming lives appearing in the media. Sarah turned 60. The party was simple, just close family and dearest friends. But sitting at the table, surrounded by people she loved, Sarah felt a deep gratitude. "A toast," Brian raised his glass, "to the woman who taught us to see, to the mother who showed her daughter that limits are illusions, to the friend who never gave up, to Sarah." "To Grandma," shouted Ethan, making everyone laugh. "To Sarah," everyone repeated, glasses raised. As she drank, Sarah looked around the table. She saw Emily and her husband, her grandchildren. She saw Brian and his family. She saw Ashley, Carlos, Lucy, Rita, all who had become not just beneficiaries of her programs, but genuine friends. She thought of the woman she had been, the invisible cleaner, insecure, afraid to dream too big, too. And she thought of the woman she had become, not because she was special, not because she had superpowers, but because she refused to accept what others said about her worth, because she fought day after day to be more than circumstances allowed, and most importantly, because she used her success not to distance herself from those still struggling, but to pull them along. Because in the end, legacy isn't measured in awards or money. It's measured in lives touched, in doors opened, in dreams fulfilled. 21 years after that fateful day, Sarah was at her desk when she received an email from a young woman named Isabella. She was in her first year of engineering college, the first in her family to go to university, and she wrote to say thank you. I grew up watching my mother's story, who was a cleaner and became an analyst through a program you helped create. She always told me that if she could do it, I could too. When I got discouraged by difficult subjects, when I felt like I didn't belong because everyone around me came from wealthy families, she showed me her story. She reminded me that we belong where we decide to belong. I just wanted you to know. You didn't just change her life, you changed mine too, and I'll do the same for others when my time comes. Sarah read the email 3 times, tears streaming freely down her face. This was the real impact. Not just the lives she touched directly, but the generations that came after. The children who grew up watching their parents transform lives. The kids who learned that change was possible. She replied to the email personally, as she always did. She offered mentorship, support, encouragement, because that was who she was now. Not just someone who had changed her own life, but someone dedicated to helping others do the same. That night, lying in bed, Sarah reflected on her journey. 21 years, more than 2 decades of work, of struggle, of transformation. There were moments of doubt, moments when she wanted to give up. But there were many more moments of joy, of fulfillment, of knowing that life had purpose. She thought about the woman she had been. Poor, overlooked, invisible, but full of dreams she refused to let die. That woman had been a seed, and from this seed grew a tree that now bore fruit, that offered shade, that planted its own seeds. And these new seeds would continue growing, long after Sarah was no longer here. This was the true legacy. Not what she achieved for herself, but the movement she helped start. The movement of seeing beyond the obvious, of valuing every person, of creating opportunities where there were once only obstacles. Sarah Johnson, former invisible cleaner, now a symbol of possible transformation. But more important than any title or recognition, she was a living example that it's never too late to change, that circumstances don't define destiny, that with determination, support, and opportunity, anyone can become much more than society expects. And as she closed her eyes to sleep, Sarah smiled, because she knew that somewhere at that very moment there was another woman cleaning offices, another invisible person with hidden dreams. And maybe, just maybe, Sarah's story would give that person the courage to try, to believe, to fight. And if that happened, if even one single person was inspired to seek more, then everything would have been worth it. Every tear, every humiliation, every early morning of study, everything. Because in the end we aren't defined by where we start, we are defined by how far we're willing to go, and by how many hands we extend to help others along the way. End of story. And you, what did you think of this journey? Do you know someone who's been through a similar situation? Tell us in the comments. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories like this one.